time we had a climate and emergency panel. So welcome to everybody, and welcome to anybody who's in the banqueting room watching this, and anybody that's watching through the council's webcam. So any apologies for absence? No, I don't think so. Dr. Kuhn has just gone out the room. Then any declarations of interest? Nope. Urgent business, none from me. Public councillor statement. We had two questions from Christine Britton, and those have been circulated to the panel for your reading. Minutes of the 25th of January.
Karen, can I just interrupt you? I'm sorry, I missed off the emergency evacuation procedure.
Okay, that's fine. You did.
Let's read that. So the emergency evacuation procedure: when the continuous alarm bell sounds, you must evacuate the building by one of the designated exits and proceed to the named assembly point. The designated exits are signposted. Arrangements are in place for the safe evacuation of disabled people. Also, just to add, the meeting's being filmed and recorded and will be available on the council's website. Images and sound recording may also be used for training purposes within the council. Anybody speaking that does not wish to be filmed should make themselves known to the camera operator.
Thank you, Michaela.
Do you mean the emergency evacuation procedure? It's the same as it always was. When the continuous alarm bell sounds, evacuate the building by one of the designated exits. Okay, minutes of the 25th January, Christine Britton, David Redwell, Councillor Karen Wellington and Councillor Ellen Jackson made statements. Can I just check that responses have been sent to them? Yeah, well, they made statements, so they wouldn't have.
Okay, lovely. So can I have a proposer from the floor that the minutes are correct? Thank you, Joel. A seconder? Thank you. Grant. So everybody else in favour? Agreed? Lovely, thank you. Right, item 8, climate emergency. So we're asked to note the report 2.1 to 2.4, and I'm going to invite Jane to make a presentation. Thank you, Jane.
Can I? Shall I say a word? Is that all right?
Well, on my papers it does say, ask the Cabinet member if there's anything you wish to add after Jane's made her statement or presentation.
Can I just start? Thank you. That's great. So Bath and North East Somerset was one of the earlier councils to declare a climate emergency and also to carry out the district-wide carbon footprint mapping that was completed in the 6 months following the declaration. And that gave us a sense of the scale of the challenge involved in providing the leadership to ensure the district achieves net zero by 2030. So 18 months on from that report to council, and after the year in which the council has had to respond to the pandemic, the sustainability team have been looking closely at how we can measure the trends in carbon emissions of the whole district, as well as the success of the measures taken by the council itself in reducing carbon emissions. So as a pioneer in the field, we're discovering that data won't necessarily be readily available, so it won't be easy, but today's report is an update to the panel on the progress to date. And I'll hand over to Jane.
No, you can stand, Jane, so I think, and then everybody can see you then.
Can I move around? Am I allowed to stand there? Yes. It's all weird. Good to see you all. So thanks, Sarah. That was a really helpful introduction. So yes, what I'm going to do is
point. But unfortunately, for reasons that Sarah's mentioned, which I'm going to outline, we weren't ready, which is why we're just sort of bringing that segment of the report, of the annual report, to the panel today. So, how does it work? Oh. Okay, so one or two key facts I think it's worth bringing to your attention before I get into the nitty-gritty, which is that, as Sarah said, we were only the second council in the country to use a tool called Scatter as a modelling tool to measure the carbon emissions of the whole district and to model a trajectory to 2030, which is our zero carbon date. That's what we did in 2019, and as I say, we were the only second local authority after Manchester to use this particular tool. The other thing to note is that the annual carbon emissions data that are used for all of this kind of monitoring come from central government, the BEIS department, and they are the only source of energy use data that we have, and so this applies to all local authorities, and there is a 2-year time lag on the data. So that means that the data that was looked at for this year is 2017's data, so that's 2 years before we declared a climate emergency. So you can start to see there some of the issues in trying to monitor what we're doing, given that you just can't get up-to-date data to enable you to do that. And then the other thing to point out is that not only were we one of the first to use the scatter tool in the first place, but we were also one of the first to attempt to do an update of the footprint and of the pathway, the how you get to 2030 bit. And the result of doing that work using the scatter tool this time round is that a comparison between 2016 data, which is what the original action plan was based on and the footprint was based on, the update from 2016 to 2017 is that there has been a slight increase in carbon emissions across the whole of Bath North East Somerset between those 2 years. But it doesn't tell us anything about our performance since we declared a climate emergency, or any of the things, it doesn't measure any of the things that we've actually done since then. So I think those are important things to note at the beginning. But I'm just going to run through some of the modelling issues that Sarah alluded to at the beginning, which is, I think it's really, really important to understand that this kind of modelling, both in terms of the footprint and in terms of the trajectory of how you get to the end goal of zero carbon, it's in its infancy, particularly at local authority and regional level. And so the scatter tool that we use, which was developed by the Tyndall Institute in Manchester, was originally designed for a city. So we were the first place to use it outside of a city. I don't think they've got it right yet even now for a place that has got a city in it and some towns and a rural hinterland. So the tool itself is evolving all the time, and the people that are running that tool are quite upfront about that. But we hadn't, I suppose, realised until we ran it the second time what the impact of those changes that they've made to the model would be. But what's clear is that there have been methodological changes. There have been changes about technology assumptions. So in order to do a trajectory to 2030, you have to make some assumptions about what technology is available and what's happening in policy and what's likely to be working in the market, the state of renewable energy, electric vehicle technology and all that kind of thing. So those assumptions are changing and will keep changing because the technology is developing. And the other really key point here is that the emissions factors have also changed. Now, this is very important. Emissions factors are it's the carbon you apply to a particular activity. So, for example, recently, electricity carbon factor has been reduced because there's now much more renewable energy coming in to produce electricity nationally and less coal. So it used to be that the carbon factor for electricity was much higher than gas, and that's turning around now. So you can see how difficult some of this is. The other thing that the scatter people have changed is they'd front-loaded a lot of action and not taken account of the development work that you would need to do to get to those actions. So they've now de-front-loaded a lot of that action, and they'll do this for everybody to later dates, which affects obviously that trajectory. Then there's the data time lag, which I've mentioned, and then this final point here, which is that we've set a goal of achieving net zero carbon by 2030, but the government isn't on that same timetable. And yet quite a lot of what we do at local level is dependent on government policy. So if government policy is geared to 2050, it's always going to be difficult for it to sort of match with a trajectory for 2030 at local level. So this is really just confirming what I've already said, which is that you can't really measure the profiles from 2016 to 2017 because they've changed. The model can't compare the pathway that we developed in 2030 in 2019 to one that you might develop using the tool today. And the model can't monitor the impact of local action on reducing local emissions directly. And then what I'd like to move us on to, so that's the situation with modelling at the moment, which applies to all local authorities, I should say, is that no model can measure the influencing and partnership work that are key elements of our action plan. So if you remember the action plan that I reported to you on last year, the October 2019 action plan, a lot of that is about how we can facilitate action by our partners or by people in the community. And there isn't a way of measuring that using this kind of model. But what we will do is we will continue to run the scatter model in-house, because we can do that ourselves now because we've learned how to do it, skills we didn't have at the beginning, and we will use that to update the area's emissions inventory each year, but we won't use it for anything else for the time being, is our plan. And then what I'd like to do is move you on to this influencing and leadership issue, because I think it's really, really important for understanding what it is we're actually trying to measure here and what it is we need to be performing on. So I don't know how well you can see the different circles here. I think you've probably got it in front of you. But this is a diagram that was actually produced by the Centre for Sustainable Energy in Bristol in order to help to explain what the role local authorities could be playing in this. And it was reproduced by the UK Climate Change Committee in their recent report, which was published in December, on the role of local authorities in delivering on climate emergency. And what you'll see is that the smallest circle, A, is direct control. So that's what we can do in terms of our own buildings, our own use of vehicles, our own management of resources, and so on. So that's what we've got direct control over, the smallest bit. Then the next bit is what we commission, what we buy, the services that we procure, the things that we buy. And the next item after me, with Richard Howroyd, is going to be covering the work we're doing to quite revolutionise, actually, our procurement strategy to enable it to deliver on the climate and ecological emergency. So maximising our influence within that second circle, B. Then the third circle is place shaping. So the next way in which we can affect action is through place shaping powers that we have. So the review that we're doing of the local plan, local plan partial update, which is all around how do we strengthen our policies around climate and ecological emergency, is really important part of that, as are the many transport projects that we're doing and the shift towards sustainable transport. So we're using all those levers of influence. On showcasing as well, there are a number of examples that we point to where we are showcasing ourselves or where we showcase the work of others in our community who are leading. So, for example, there's a lot of good work going on across the public sector, the two universities and the hospital, places like that, but also Cambridge Civic Centre at its time was the lowest carbon building public sector. We delivered that, and that's been used to demonstrate best practice in other organisations and so on. Then the next circle out is E, which is partnership working, which is a very important part of what we do here in Bath, North East Somerset, in terms of our ability to convene people, to enable those people to work together to do more than we would have done on our own. And the Economic Recovery and Renewal Board, which is the new partnership that has been set up since COVID, and which has led the work on the new shared vision for the future based around delivering on 2030. This is the beginnings of a new big partnership where we're working across all of the different sectors and enabling more people to take more action, take responsibility for that action, so that it isn't just the council that's delivering, it is all of those important organisations that we work with across the community. And then the biggest circle out on the edge there, F, is involving, engaging, communicating, and working with local people. And again, we're active in that area. We've had despite COVID, we've had a solid community engagement programme. Sarah's led a bunch of webinars last summer on her climate conversations, and we've since done further ones under green renewal and recovery, and much more besides in terms of things like, for example, the training programme for parish councils, sessions that we've run for community groups on how to develop action plans, and that sort of thing. So I wanted to take you through that because I think it really is important for developing a good perspective on what it is we actually need to measure and how we should do it. Just a quote from that report, which I put into the report. This is from the UK Climate Change Committee, which, as you know, advises government on the carbon budget and on delivery against it. They did this report in December on the role of local government. And this is what they said, which is that although we have all those levers that I've just gone through with you across all of those different spheres of influence, these levers alone are not sufficient to deliver net zero ambitions due to gaps in key powers that prevent system scale or holistic approaches, policy and funding barriers. And I think it's very useful to just bear that in mind as we look at what we measure. So what we're going to do is take a rather different approach to the one we started off with in the first year to how we measure action in our annual reporting. And so what we're going to be doing is measuring action that reduces emissions from the priority areas of buildings, both domestic and non-domestic, transport, waste and industry, and measuring the increase in renewable energy. So all of the priority areas for action that we identified in the first action plan, we will be measuring the carbon footprint of all of those things each year. But we will be utilising a mixture of qualitative and quantitative methods to monitor action across what the council does and across the wider community in terms of emissions. We will monitor the action from all council services. We will monitor the action from our partners and through all the partnership working that we help to facilitate, and we will monitor the action of that comes out of community engagement and facilitation, in other words, the work that is done by parish councils, by community groups, and all of the rest of it. And I just want to show you, I'm getting towards the end now, the diagram that I put in the pack, which is this just shows you the work that's underway. So you may be aware that the council is developing a new integrated performance framework, or reporting framework, I think it's called, the IRF, which is in development now to improve how we monitor performance across everything that we do. And within that, we're going to have a climate emergency and ecological emergency reporting framework within it to monitor all of the action that I've talked about, starting from the council actions that relate to our own emissions, through to council service delivery that then helps to reduce emissions through the services that we deliver and how we engage with people, through our partnership working, through the work that other people are doing, and through how we engage with the community. So that, I won't run through all of that in detail, but this is just to give you an idea of how we're going to do annual emissions and action reporting from this October, November onwards. So when we come back for our second annual report on the climate action plan, which I think will be in the November council meeting, it will include the first new reports using this new performance framework, so that we can both quantitatively and qualitatively measure what we do, not just the carbon emissions of the area, but measure the things that people are doing, including ourselves, that are helping to reduce those emissions over time. Okay?
Thank you, Jane. Does anybody have a question for Jane? John?
Thank you, Jane. It's clearly a very complex science, or not even yet a science, an emerging science about how we do this. And clearly we're towards the front of the pack of councils trying to do this. I guess I'm kind of struggling at the moment. I kind of had imagined in my naive little world that we'd have a kind of a graph 2020, 2030, with a kind of a line to say this is what we need to do to get to 2030 net zero, so maybe even going down. And then this is where we are. And my sense is we're still struggling to work out how we even draw that dot on the line, on the page, and how to measure where we are this year, never mind then be able to say with any kind of assurance that we're actually on target. So I guess I was kind of then thinking, well, how can we do it? And what's the risk that we're busy doing some things which are actually the wrong things, and that we should be focusing on other things which are going to have a bigger impact? And so I don't know whether in that performance framework...
I'm not used to this. So you're right. So what we did was we went out there in year one during the first 6 months of having declared the climate emergency, and we found the only show in town that said they could help us to work out how to draw that line between now and 2030. And what went into that in the first year was the government data on energy use from our area, which in itself is not 100% accurate. Okay, it's based on estimates, and it's only partial information. It doesn't tell you everything. Then they put in a whole bunch of assumptions about things they expect to happen in that 10-year period based on current government policy, based on what the Climate Change Committee is saying, and then they make a whole bunch of assumptions around technology. Because it really isn't a question of just, you can't just say, well, here we are now, so that's how we get to there. It's so much more complicated than that. What we've tried to do, we've tried to simplify it a bit by saying, when we did the first carbon footprint for the whole area, if you remember, I had a pie chart that showed you 29% of our emissions were from transport. Forget the other numbers now, but the other two-thirds are buildings, part of which is domestic and the rest non-domestic. So we know where most of the carbon emissions are coming from. So long as the actions that we're taking are relevant to those three priorities of buildings, new build, transport, and then renewable energy, because the more renewable energy that we produce, that's contributing towards a reduction of, for example, home energy, electricity use because they've got solar on the roof, then you know you're doing things that are relevant to getting towards your pathway. But the other thing is that what is becoming clearer, and I think now that the modelers are getting a bit more honest about it, to be honest, is that at local level it's incredibly difficult to actually give a detailed pathway between now and 2030, because so little is actually in the gift of the local authority to control, which is why I showed you that onion diagram. Yeah. So unless we get more powers from central government to do some of the things that need to be done around retrofitting in particular, transport, those kinds of things, we can do a lot at local level, and we can monitor what we're doing, and basically what I was trying to say is we're going to be monitoring all the activity that we can across the different sectors, ourselves, our partnerships, and the community, against the three priority areas for action, which is home energy efficiency, other buildings, retrofitting and new build, renewables, and transport.
So do we have a timeline then of when we're going to have the indicators for those three key areas?
Yes.
And yeah. Kind of almost, because I imagine that with that onion diagram, that would almost end up with, here are our 5 or 6 priorities for the next 12 months for that layer of the onion, and this is how well we're doing, and actually we'd intended to do this much, but actually we were only able to do this but this is the mitigation, and at the moment we haven't kind of got that level of kind of detail to be able to then challenge.
We're developing it, but it's a huge piece of work, and we're working across all of the different services at the moment to get to work out the correct performance indicators for each action that's relevant to delivery on this. So the team that are the business intelligence team who are developing this new integrated reporting framework, there's this layer in it that's all to do with the climate and ecological emergency, and that is basically developing KPIs for each area of activity across every single service that will be built into the programme each year that will be measured. Whether all of that will have been put in place by the time we report in November, I don't think so, but we're getting through the services quite rapidly now, so we will be nearly there in terms of being able to say what we're doing. But with the stuff that is not under our control, it's what we can't measure it in the way you would like. We can only measure it in terms of qualitatively what's going on, whether a partnership has developed around a particular kind of action or not, whether there are community groups active or not. Do you see what I mean? So that's how we will measure that stuff that goes beyond what the council can do directly itself. But with the council's activity, we will have specific KPIs against all of the commitments made in the original action plan, mostly populated by the time we report the next annual report at the end of the year.
Okay, I guess I'm just kind of feeling that, I don't know whether it was full council that we had a member of the public come who kind of almost wrapped our knuckles or our wrists and said we as a Scrutiny weren't doing enough to hold the council to account around delivering it. And I guess I'm still struggling to be able to point at anything and say, here's evidence of what it kind of, I'd be keen that we can to be clear about what we can do to support you, Jane, to kind of really help the council really deliver that framework of performance, so we can then, hands on our heart, say, well, actually, this is where we've got problems and this is what we're doing about it, but we're not,
Yes, I mean, I remember those particular remarks, and, I do think the reason I've tried to explain to you the difference between qualitative and quantitative measuring and the different spheres of influence that we have is that I think there is a misunderstanding that some people have because of the scatter data that we produced in the first year, which had, slide after slide after slide of data, which has all changed since that was done, is that we never went out there with the intention of being able to measure absolutely everything. Those were ideas against, in terms of the types of action you would need to do and the scale of action that you would need to take. It wasn't a plan saying you've got to do this by this date. Right? So, and I think that's been a bit misunderstood because you can't monitor that. So if that questioner was expecting the committee to monitor that, that's just impossible to do. But the new performance framework that we're developing in the council now will give you something that monitors the work that we're doing in terms of our own carbon emissions, how we can influence those carbon emissions through the services that we deliver, and then how we can influence through the partnership work that we deliver. And that will become much clearer when we report at the end of the year. I can't give it to you now because it's a work in progress, unfortunately. I would love to, but I can't.
And I guess I'd be really keen to be able to almost have a rating score. So we're saying we're trying to influence, I don't know, the RUH is one of your examples of the university. And our current rating score is that they're engaged at 4 out of 5 on that. And then at least you've got then a sense, are we making progress? Or we've got a big employer over here who's actually only engaged 1 out of 5. And so we've got more work to do. And by having some kind of way of grading that level of engagement with the wider stakeholders then provides at least a kind of an opportunity for us to kind of...
I mean, I don't know whether we can do that, what you've just described, but certainly what we can do, and there is some very exciting work going on in the RUH at the minute around their new bid, which is very much about doing healthcare in a different way, and that includes delivering on net zero. So the work to engage with those partners is happening right now. So there will be more to say about specific partners, I think, by the time we get to November. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on now. So I've got Lisa, Paul, Joanna, Shelley and Grant. So Lisa.
Thank you, Chair.
I've got a couple of comments and a couple of questions. I think comment one, I remember very clearly the presentation, well, fairly clearly the presentation, and 68% I think was homes, buildings, carbon emissions there, and you identified that a small proportion that we could actually impact, as indicated by the model, was our own buildings. Mm-hmm. And I must say that I have some sympathy with Joel in that, frankly, this is more of we're working on it. Now, that happened in October, November in 2019. I would have expected that given that we have got ownership over our own buildings and also our schools and things like leisure centres or whatever that we directly have credence over, something should have been done to actually make a list. This is what we can do. We're going to put solar power on there. We're going to put cladding on there or whatever. And what disappoints me about this report, I was really looking forward to it. I was excited about it and thinking, hey, what have we done so far? It actually doesn't tell us anything.
No, that's not what it's for.
Well, if I can finish. I'm very disappointed that the scatter, well, I hope we didn't pay much for it because 2016, now 2017, we're in 2021, which is sort of 3.5 to 4 years on. And a lot has changed since then, including improved solar panel use, increased electric car use, etc. And so the spending time modelling, I do question whether that is the best use of time. I'm very interested in this climate and ecological emergency performance monitor in terms of actually how that's going to be developed to be something particularly quantitative, because it's the quantitative, how many houses have been retrofitted, what are Curo doing to retrofit their stock. So there is that issue as well. I think finally is my question that you've said you're going to bring the next report to full council. Chairman, this is surely, we should be looking at that report before it goes to full council. Otherwise, we're trying to sort something after the event. I mean, what's the point of having a scrutiny panel if we don't do our job to benefit council?
I agree,
Thank you.
because our comments then can be put towards that report as well for council.
Yeah, can I respond? Yeah, on our own buildings, we did, the report on all the things that we were doing was in the January report. So this wasn't a repeat of the January report or an update on that report. It was because this bit about carbon emissions and this was only about the carbon emissions and pathways monitoring. The January report had more in it in terms of what each service was doing, not in a huge amount of detail because it was quite a high-level report, but that's when it's in the annual report that we report that. And just to bring you up to date, we have done a survey of council buildings. It was done through the South West Energy Hub, and we've got a short list of about 5. The project development work is going on now, and we've got funding for 1 through the Public Sector Decarbonisation Fund. We won almost, I think, $500,000 for that, and another similar amount for Cleveland Pool. So those two, so that care home is a complete retrofit, energy efficiency and solar on the roof, and there will be others. So that's already in the pipeline, and there'll be others that follow. So that work has, and I did mention that in the January report. So it's, you know, if we want to have a more detailed conversation about what was in the January report, we could maybe do that on another occasion. On the modelling, we haven't spent very much on it, and we will be bringing, as I say, bringing all of that tool in-house now. We won't be paying any more on that. And then on the performance monitor, as it develops, it occurs to me that it really would be a good idea, as that it's just not ready yet to bring to the panel, but it would be good to bring it to the panel before we go back to full council, I think, so that you can have a look in more detail at what that particular element of the performance monitoring is going to look like, what the KPIs look like, all of those questions that you asked. So I don't see why we couldn't do that. I think that would be a really good idea, and that would give you an opportunity to have a much more in-depth conversation about some of that detail. So yeah, if we can schedule it in, as I say, it's you know, going through every single service to develop particular KPIs just takes time, and but it's getting there.
Thank you, Jane. We can take that forward to put on the planning agenda and see if we can bring that back again. Paul.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a question for the Cabinet member rather than the officer. And first of all, that was a very good report. Thank you very much. Quite frankly, I'm really not interested in reaching 2030 and blaming whoever the current government is of the day. And over the next decade, we will have Conservative governments and Labour governments, and maybe even another coalition government or whatever. But there will be a range of governments. And by 2030, I don't want to reach that point and say it's the government's fault. This is our issue. So my question to the Cabinet member is what leadership role, because there's a big thing there about leadership, what leadership role is she taking to really drive this agenda forward? Because this is important to everyone across the chamber. This is not something about blaming others. This is about delivering outcomes and achievements. So I would like to know what the plans of the Cabinet member are to do that, and depending on her reply, I might wish to change recommendation 2.2.
Well, I think this is a really, this is an important area, and I think it's about leadership, about speaking in public, about leading public engagement events, which of course have been held online over the last year, and about making, what we've been doing over the last 2 years is we've been changing things in terms of policies which underlie all the activities of the council and the ways in which we can influence all the various levels, the different levels of the onion diagram that Jane showed you. And there is clearly more work to do. And you know, this is I mean, we've brought in a clean air zone. We are bringing in livable neighbourhoods and active travel. We're one of the first councils in the country to be updating our local plan with the primary purpose of addressing the climate emergency. And this is something that underlies all areas of our work. So I think, this is a priority of the administration of which you've been a part for the last 2 years, and it's things, something we're working on in every area.
Paul, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, we didn't have one specific example in that reply, which I thought was evasive, and therefore I would like to strengthen 2.2. I'd like to give notice that I'd like to strengthen 2.2 to ask the Cabinet member to come back with some specific goals and target dates.
Happy to do that.
Have you got that note, Michaela? Sorry, Joanna?
Oh, thank you, Jane, for your very good presentation. Again, I have quite a few questions. Very useful to hear the different points that people have raised. I very much support Councillor O'Brien's comments, and I too had picked up on 2.2 and the leadership role. One of the things it says in the document is that so far the leadership, there has been training so far for members and senior officers. Can I ask which cabinet members have actually received that leadership training to date, please, Councillor Warren?
It's been offered to all councillors. I don't have the list off the top of my head.
Do we know if the leader has actually taken that councillor training?
I'm not sure. I'd have to check that.
I was at that and I wasn't aware of him being there. So I do think it's really important that from the leadership all the way down that training takes place. Mm-hmm. The issue about sequestration, that is really an important element in this document, and you talk quite a lot about tree planting. So one of the things you have already mentioned, Jane, is that you mentioned 29% about transport and about how, that is the sort of ambition that we need to reach. Can you just let me know how many trees we are planning to plant by 2023?
Our objective is to plant 100,000 trees by 2023.
Okay.
But I mean, tree planting, as you know, tree planting is a small part of the areas in which we're working on to achieve our...
So that's where this problem lies, as I think there's an awful lot of people out there in the wider community that think, oh, we hear this great political rhetoric saying we're going to plant trees and somehow that deals with the problem, and that most people then carry on with their normal lives. How are we going to get the sort of information to people that we actually need 43.2 million trees just to deal with the transport, and that alone will be an acreage of 61% of Bath and North East Somerset? So how do we get that information out to the wider public?
I agree with you that we probably do need more resource working on educating the public and getting the message out there. So we'll be putting forward,
Can I bring Jane in?
Sorry?
Can I bring Jane in a minute, please?
Yep, if that's okay.
Yep.
I don't think the council is going out and saying that the answer to everything is planting trees, and because if I would certainly be very unhappy if that's what we were proposing, because it's obviously nonsense. But I think the issue around carbon sequestration is just the reason for putting it into the report is because it's currently a missing element in any of the modelling. And when you've got a rural area like ours, there are an awful lot of different ways in which you could be sequestering more carbon through the way in which farmers farm, and not just tree planting, but all sorts of other ways in which we manage the land, all of that kind of thing. We haven't developed that piece of work yet, and it's a gap in the modelling that a lot of local authorities who've got wider rural hinterlands have found, and that's why that we've got some of these kind of gaps in how we can talk about having an impact on those carbon emissions and being able to draw lines between what we do and the impact that it has. So I think it would be very wrong to think that the council is suggesting that we can solve it all through tree planting. We're definitely not doing that.
But I guess that there's a conversation about the political conversation and in the background. And again, going back to this document, you even say in 3.11, this modelling does not help us. So, I mean, going back to the point that Joel has raised, that the scatter system that you have put in place doesn't actually take us anywhere, it doesn't seem to have got us anywhere, and the years are passing by. So, a lot of people in the regular community think, we're busy working at something, and they see trees being planted. I certainly have had something like 450 trees planted in Lambridge recently, and everybody thinks, job done, they can just carry on as they previously were. So I guess that there's a mismatch between the messaging and what we're doing, and there is a huge, I mean, this is a huge problem, and we just seem to not be recognising just the magnitude that we have of the issue that we need to tackle. We don't seem to have identified the levers that are within the council's control or influence that we can actually do. And going back to the KPIs, what are they? Where is that dashboard, and why hasn't that taken place so far?
Well, as I say, the KPIs are in development now. That dashboard will be available by the time we report in November. The levers we have actually gone through in both the October 2019 report and the January 2021 report. We went through all of the ways in which we are attempting to influence across all the different spheres, but all of those areas that I've run through actually. And I think in terms of how you get the message out to the public, we've done a lot of work. It's been difficult during the pandemic. We've run a lot of webinars. We've got a big event planned for September in the lead up to the big international conference, but it will provide a platform for community engagement across a 2-week period. So we're doing as much as we can, but I think one of the really difficult things, and which I think is important for members of the panel to understand, is that people do want black and white answers to what, as you've identified, is a huge and complex problem. And it's very difficult. I think there are people out there, I think my own dentist, for example, thinks that because he's got an electric car, that's him off the hook. He doesn't need to worry about any other aspect of his lifestyle or anything else. So I think the council can't solve all of those problems directly in terms of how people perceive those things, because we're part of the wider world. But we can engage with our communities in very positive ways through action on the ground, through the parish. There's a huge amount of work, for example, going on to develop parish-level climate action plans, where people are really engaging with the things that they can do within their communities. And I think that's...
So I live in a ward that doesn't have a parish, and we have none of that system in place. So in Bath, you don't have that option. So I certainly know that people in my community have not been reached in that way at all by anyone in the last 2 years. So how are we going to deal with the difference between Bath and North East Somerset? Because there's a huge disparity there. And I keep hearing about the parishes and how they've been reached, but the people within Bath have not been reached. So that I would certainly like to have something on that. And then also going back to your onion, so let's talk about that diagram. Now, I remember looking at it and thinking, well, transport is in the C section. Now, one of the things I certainly know in my previous role is that actually that's one of the few levers the council actually has direct control over. So why isn't transport actually in A?
Well, actually it is. So it's in A.
It wasn't in the diagram that I was given.
Okay, well, it says travel, but basically it's where we've got direct control. A covers anything where we've got direct control, right? That's what that meant. The reason I mentioned it in place shaping is clearly there's another element which is around planning policy for transport and travel. So it appears in, those specific things will appear in more than one of those circles, obviously. So yeah, that immediate circle A obviously relates to things that we have direct control over.
So how can we have some KPIs on that at the next scrutiny meeting?
They're being developed now. In fact, I think the meeting with the transport team has happened this week on developing those KPIs for that performance, for that new framework that I mentioned.
Which then brings me to WECA. So the carbon assessment tool must also include WECA in that process. So what involvement with WECA has been put in place for those KPIs?
We'd have to ask the transport team.
I don't have the transport team in front of me. Have you and Sarah?
I don't have the answer.
And Sarah is also now in charge
of
of transport. So could you answer that question, please, Councillor Warren?
Could you repeat the question, please?
I was saying that WECA are now involved in terms of the KPIs and transport. So how are you also going to include them in getting that KPI information in terms of the KPIs? And the transport data.
I don't have that information to hand. I've not been briefed on that yet, but I'm very happy to work on involving that.
Good.
Are you able to bring that answer back in 5 days?
Yes, happy to do that.
Are you happy with that, Joanna? Lovely, thank you. So,
thank you.
Oh, Sarah?
Can I respond to some of those points, please? I don't think anyone from either within the Cabinet or with any of the papers produced by the Council has ever suggested that tree planting was the whole solution to the climate emergency. I think we have been very clear that the three priority areas are transport and energy efficiency in buildings and renewable energy, and we've been working very hard on those areas. What I do notice is that the public at large are extremely keen on tree planting, and tree planting is one small strand of the response to the climate emergency. So absolutely, we are working with them to try and support them on that, because it's something they love to do, and I think it gives them a feeling that they have done something positive and useful. So we are supporting that. But that is not, that is one strand, but it is not by any means either the main or the sole focus. I think as Cabinet members, former Cabinet members, will be very well aware, it's not been the main focus of our work over the last 2 years. But in a way, it's easy to plant a tree and to look at it and say there it is, whereas, trying to bring about, to create a whole industry around retrofitting houses is a much harder and more nebulous thing, and it's much harder to get a handle on. In terms of Bath not being reached by the comms so far, I think you probably will be aware that 1 year ago, just as the pandemic hit, we were on the point of having a big launch event in the Guildhall, and all Bath people would have been able to walk in off the street and join in that event. And sadly, it had to be cancelled. And so, as you know, we moved over to webinars, and Bath people have been able to sign up for webinars just as parish council people have. So, insofar as we have been able to run events, they have been able to engage with them. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Jane mentions 2021, but it's quoted as 21st January 2020. Is it actually 2020 or 2021?
It was 21.
21.
Yeah, it does say late 2021 here. Thank you. So, Shelley?
Thank you, Chair. This is a question for Jane. Hi, Jane. Just thinking back to the three priority areas, and the final one was transport. Presumably, when the CAS has been in place for, let's say, a year, will we get some figures on progress on transport emissions? Will the CAS details help us, gauge some sort of progress towards?
I would imagine so, Shelley. I think
That would be a
coming in
question
later.
for Kath when she comes in, actually. Item 10.
Yeah.
Grant.
Yeah, I think Councillor O'Brien summed it up quite well when she just used the word disappointing. And I think, constantly getting these reports, sitting in this panel, and, we all represent residents in various areas, and what they want to see is direct action to deal with the climate emergency, and that's not being achieved by writing reports. And so I agree with Councillor O'Brien that it is very, very disappointing how far we've got in, a couple of years. We haven't done anything. I can't think of many things we've actually really achieved. In business, for example, new KPIs are developed at least twice a year. I have my annual review, my midterm review, we develop KPIs, and it's about looking at what worked well the year before and then implementing things to improve on that in the future. And if we can't even achieve that, then that says something really bad is going on within this council, because KPIs aren't that difficult to come up with. They're really not, and I'm struggling to see why we are so slow. We're moving at a snail's pace, and it's an emergency. Where is the urgency is my main point, and what is taking so long?
Sarah, Jane? That's not one person, that's two people.
Do you want to go first? I'm sure Jane will give you more detail, but it's an incredibly complex area, and we are one of the pioneers trying to do some of these things for the first time.
Yeah, obviously that's true. I think if you look at the January report, we did actually enumerate there quite a number of things that we are doing, and I think the important point that we've been trying to make in this presentation is to get a real understanding within the panel about the things that we can do and the things that we can influence. so that we know what it is that we are actually measuring. And that was really the purpose of the report, not to report on all of the activity that we have been undertaking, and there'll be much more detail on that in the next annual report towards the end of the year.
Yes, certainly.
Thank you. I just have another question as well. You said about the data only being available 2 years afterwards, so I'm just curious as to why we're looking at 2017 still then.
That's the only data that's available from the government for any local authority area on their energy use emissions.
Right, okay.
The government produces that for every local authority area in the country. They produce it every year, but they produce it in arrears, and that's how it works. So no local authority can access any data. What will be coming through this year is the 2018 data.
So we won't see, by, say, the end of this council, will we actually see any of the data that what we have achieved in our local authority in the term of this administration?
Since the 2019 Climate Emergency Declaration? Very little. That's my point, is that the data that is available to show that is in arrears by quite a long period of time. So that's what makes it difficult.
Okay, so I've got Dr. Kumar. I want to draw this at 5 o'clock because we do have another 3 items on our agenda. Okay, so Dr. Kumar.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reflect on some of the things which has been said just now, both by the Cabinet member and Councillor Grant Johnson and others. I think in the couple of years I've seen that despite the biggest crisis humanity has ever seen, we have done quite a lot. Yeah, so it is not correct. It is belying the truth that you would say that we have not done anything or the last administration has not done anything. I would like to put my thanks on record to former Councillor for Cabinet and the current Deputy Leader and the officers for doing so much. We should be proud of these facts, and we should be celebrating and not unnecessarily attacking the administration just for the sake of being in opposition. Bath is the first city out of London to start CAJET. Very ambitious program of 100,000 trees. I mean, we can do arguments how beneficial it is, but we have to look at, just because we are not in that position. But what else can be done pragmatically? And people work, all the officers, the cabinet members and the councillors, they're working hard, and we should admire that, we should be proud of that. It is already very disappointing that we have lost so many lives and so many friends, and then unnecessarily criticism. If you criticize, come with the fact why it has been not done. Rather than saying there's just nothing has been done and all this. What else can council do? And I really feel very, very depressed with these kind of unnecessary criticism. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I've got Paul wanted to say something.
Yes, thanks very much, Chair. First of all, all I would urge to Grant is to read the papers, and you'll see there's actually been quite a lot done. The question we've got here is, has there been enough done? And that's why I said in 2.2, can I have an amendment? And you didn't ask if there was any seconder to that, Chair. So I would like to just put that again. Can we amend 2.2 to add after the word goal before the full stop, and for the Cabinet member to bring back a series of target dates and goals?
Yes. First of all, I say to Captain Kumar, it is the role of this scrutiny panel to scrutinise. We would not be doing our role if we...
I beg your pardon. I would just say to Councillor Kumar, it is this panel's role to scrutinise and be a critical friend of the reports. no one for one moment would suggest that Jane and her team have not been working hard. My view, though, is I am not a great believer in modelling, because actually you can make statistics say whatever you want them to say, and also, as Jane has identified, there are several flaws with the modelling. It's changing, technology is changing, the environment is changing. We talk about national government. Well, national government within the last 6-9 months has said gas boilers out by 2025, all electric vehicles by 2030. Now that is a very, very big push, and we can hope that the money will come behind to accommodate that. So I come back to the issues about what we can do. And I'm a bit of a pragmatist because you're right, modelling is difficult. You're working with like clutching balloons. So why don't we hone back and say, okay, let's make a practical list of things under the council's control, and as I say, start with the buildings, because there's commercial buildings as well that could take solar panels. There is renewable energy. There are a lot of practical things that we could identify, so that at least we have something to hang on to. I think my disappointment, as Councillor has referred to, is because we're working on it, we're developing it, and you're right, 2 years have gone by since we're almost sadly into October 2021, and yet the first report came in October 2019. Yes, there's been a pandemic, but we are very proud that our council and the officers have kept going. So my plea would be, let's be more pragmatic. Let's accept that this modelling is riddled with inconsistencies and uncertainties, and let's get back to basics and say, a hard drive, if there's things that have been achieved, let's put a physical number to it or whatever. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think you're right, actually. We need to see the evidence that's been done. We want to see those buildings that have been retrofitted, they've got solar panels on, all of that. So I think that will add value to a report, really, so that we're seeing that as evidence. And I think Joanna wanted to come back in.
Thank you. I would just like to add, our future and the descendants in our future won't be happy that we weren't effective enough and loud enough on this point. So going back to the KPIs, we already know that sustainable development goals exist. How could we use those locally and quickly, because they already exist? The UN is working on them, countries around the world are working on them, to bring this in as a dashboard that we can quickly and effectively show the local community.
So did you want to come back on that, Jane, or do you just want to make note of that?
Yeah, we've looked at the SDGs for the area as a whole within the One Shared Vision work, and basically we will use some of them, but it doesn't apply very well to an area like ours. But what you will see is a dashboard, because that's what my team working with the business intelligence team are developing now. You will see a dashboard by the end of this year when we report back. So, yeah.
Thank you. So very quickly, Dr. Kumar and then Joel.
Well, thank you very much. I completely agree that the role of the scrutiny panel, in fact, this morning there was an email what those members of the scrutiny panel are supposed to do, although it was just sent this morning through email. Yes, I agree with that, but let's go fact by fact, rather than just saying, no, nothing has been done. I mean, obviously in front of us there is the achievement made by the council, what has been worked out. We do not have time to read all those kind of things. So this is all my point was, that yes, positive criticism, that is the role of the opposition in any democracy, and that is very, very good. But come with factual points rather than just saying nothing has been done or obviously we need to do more. Obviously we are doing good work, but better work is obviously required, and I agree with that. That's all my point was.
Thank you. So John, last question that is then.
Yeah, thank you. I get my sense is that we're all kind of really keen and willing this policy around climate emergency to work and to kind of deliver, and it's trying to find the right tools and the support to be able to kind of deliver that as quickly as we can. So I guess my final question is really, what more can we do to support you, the officers, and the Cabinet to actually unblock the problems that maybe, or the things that are creating the time delays? Is there more that we could be doing? Should we be pushing for more resource around KPI development? Are there some key things that we could be individually kind of helping support and block the problems?
To be honest with you, I think I don't think there's a blockage now. I think the work is in train. I think the thing is that the truth is that we've been on a learning journey. So we tried some things out. We were the first out the stops. We tried some things out. Some of them haven't worked. Some of them we're rethinking. We're bringing them in-house. We're doing them differently. I'm about to bring in some more resources, so that will help a lot. So I don't think that's the issue. I think it's because we've been learning is part of the issue. And I think the other thing is that, we had a pandemic in the middle of it all, and it did sort of throw up all our plans up into the air for a while. But things are getting back on track now. So I think I would just ask for the panel's patience, really. We're trying to produce something that enables you to see more clearly what it is we're doing and that measures it in a sensible way. And we'll bring that back to you as soon as we can.
I think I would respond that if what you want as a panel to see is a programme of sort of public education, I do think we would need more resource in order to do that, more intensive public education.
Thank you for that excellent debate. Just very quickly, I just want to know, what can we do to pressure central government to change a policy?
Oh, that's a whole bunch of other work that we are doing.
That's fine.
There is a long work in train. Yeah.
Lovely. So can I just go back to Michaela just to read out the change to 2.2, please?
To ask the Cabinet member to come back with some specific goals and target dates.
Right. And when will we like that back? That's the next question. Do we want that back for the 21st of June, just for an update, or do you want more time?
Depends what you mean exactly.
I could talk to Jane and you.
That's fine. Okay, yep, that's fine. Right.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Jane.
Microphone's not on. So climate emergency procurement strategy. I'd like to invite Richard Holroyd, if he can hear us, if he could come into the chamber, please. Thank you, Richard. Can I ask Sarah Warren, Councillor Sarah Warren, to introduce this item, please?
Yep. So Richard is bringing this a paper a paper about a consultation on a really important update to our procurement strategy. From the onion diagram that you saw before, it's the second layer out from the centre. It brings the procurement strategy into line with our climate emergency declaration and facilitates our ability to minimise carbon emissions from our whole supply chain. Amongst other features, one of the important things this new strategy will do is to give us more flexibility to procure from local suppliers where appropriate, ensuring we keep funds within the local economy and reduce the mileage and carbon footprint of materials procured by the Council. So with that, I'll hand over to Richard for more detail.
Thank you, Richard. Can everybody hear Richard?
Fine.
That's it.
Turn that one up. Thank you. So, unfortunately, because of restrictions, I would have liked to have brought Chrissy Story into the room to help on this. She's sitting next door. Is that Chrissy is actually really important in this journey, as we've literally just appointed her to be a new procurement commissioning manager, and she is taking the lead on the council's procurement strategy. She has very good sustainability background. She's been doing a lot of work with Bristol City Council around the Going for Gold food initiatives. We both work jointly with the Crown Commercial Services on the national pilot around dynamic food procurement, which is one of the brilliant things that we're trying to do to make sure that local food can get into the public sector supply chain. So really what I'm trying to do today is just consult with the panel on how we are updating our procurement strategy. It is going to try and address our strategic role, and what I'd like to do is just put a little bit of context here. The previous procurement strategy, the Think Local procurement strategy, I worked with the late Councillor Bellotti on many years ago, and I think it was a very successful strategy. We did an awful lot of things, in particular around getting local organisations into the supply chain. We've had a bit of a delay in updating that strategy, except that's not really been of our making, and that's more because of the national scene. We were waiting for the local government national procurement strategy. We were also waiting for a long time for the outcome of Brexit, because clearly we knew that was going to have a big impact on what we were going to be able to do. And we were in effect waiting for the green paper, which the central government has now published. So there's been lots of hanging about and delays from that point of view. So the recent Transforming Public Procurement green paper is very important, because it makes our life a lot easier in terms of what we may want to do. So it's also, luckily, a government priority. It was in the Queen's speech. We're expecting early implementation from September, so that is going to help us. So in effect, what we're talking about here, we've been talking about for quite a time, but waiting for the right opportunity to update, so that we weren't sort of like stymied by legislation and having to update things again. So, just some context. Clearly procurement is council-wide. If you look at how much we spend on goods and services, including capital works each year, it's normally in excess of £200 million a year. So we can be quite influential with our spend. If it's done right, it can definitely have a positive contribution to carbon net zero and help us deliver sustainability priorities and ambitions. However, we have to also consider all our other priorities as well. And I've got a diagram I'll show you in a minute around that. I think we also have to consider how it works within both our existing procurement rules and future rules and regulations. And that's both internal and external. We're very much in a very heavily regulated world once we get into public procurement, and there is always the risk of legal challenge. But what I would certainly say, unlike in the private sector where you might just be buying goods or services, quite often looking at seeing if you can get it the cheapest to the required standard, procurement, I think we have a far more strategic and political role with a small p. We can influence the local markets, we can influence the supply chain, and certainly I do a lot of work nationally, and as an authority I think we pull well above our weight in influencing the marketplace. We've done a lot of work nationally looking at how to better involve working with SMEs and the smaller providers, which can be quite difficult. And certainly, as I've mentioned before, we have a reputation for the innovative work we've done on food. However, clearly, we, as an authority, because we don't have a school meal service, we don't actually spend that much on food anymore. But clearly, we will be looking at it in terms of care homes, etc. So, I mentioned national policy. And you can't get more up to date than this, I'm afraid. I said, I think this is really good news. So this is procurement policy statement. Well, it's a PPN 0521, and these are the government's new procurement priorities, which we now have to deliver through the procurement process. So we've got 3. Create a new business, new jobs and new skills in the UK, improving supplier diversity, innovation and resilience, and then in terms of this panel's tackling climate change and reducing waste. And I think they work quite well together. And whilst we've titled the procurement strategy a climate emergency procurement strategy, I feel it will probably deal with most of these areas as well. And at the end of this little presentation, I'll talk about what's in the name, because I think I'd be quite interested in views on what we should name the strategy, given we have a Think Local strategy in the past. Is this Think Climate? Is this Think Sustainable? Is it Think Create Jobs? There's a whole load of things that we could include within it. So, the framework we're trying to operate within is to ensure the procurement strategy delivers the council ambitions. So clearly, addressing the climate and nature emergency is a key part of that. But I will always have to say, I also have to meet specific procurement objectives as well. So I need to make sure the contract outcomes are delivered, especially on the larger ones. I need to look at value for money, and I actually think that's important when we talk about the climate emergency, because cheapest is not necessarily value for money. Maybe we need a longer term view of what we're trying to deliver. So we'll talk about whole life costing and making sure that environmental factors are taken into account within contracts. But again, there are issues. I need to ensure compliance. As I say, this is a legal minefield at times. We have had legal challenges in the past, but we're pretty good at compliance from that point of view. But that doesn't mean that we won't be challenged on what we do. And quite often that can get very technical. And then I'll just refer you to the local government authority's national procurement strategy. Clearly, that is a very specific strategy around procurement for local government. So within that, that has key KPIs and measurables which is quite useful. And also there's a method of benchmarking how good a service you are providing. So we then have to pull everything together and put it within our operating model. And this is in effect a very basic operating model. I quite like this one. It's quite often they put in terms of a procurement commissioning cycle, but I think this is a little bit more straightforward. So we have to work out what we want, plan how we get it, source it. I normally go out to tender. Then we've got to basically make sure we know what we're getting, pay for it correctly, make sure we're paying the right amount, and then we have to manage the contract and the supplier. So, very simple framework. So, I think you might have seen this diagram before. I just thought it was just worth repeating, and just to join up with what Jane was saying, procurement and commissioning is a really important part of the local authority's way of influencing spend. Scope 3 emissions, in particular, we can spend quite a bit of work on. And I think there's a lot more we can probably do for the future, and we've got a few innovative ideas around that. So, I'm not going to go through all the actions that we're putting within the strategy in a lot of detail, because clearly I think you will need time to have a look at that, but I'm more than happy to answer questions. It's that we've structured it in this manner. We've got actions specifically around addressing the climate emergency. Then very much I think about consultation, because I think that's really important, because we've got to make sure we are delivering what is wanted by the community and what's wanted by the administration. And then clearly we've got some of the principles that we need to look at, preparing for the future again, delivering for local residents, and actually having far more of a focus on prevention. I think they're all very logical things to work on. So, within the strategy, we're detailing a whole load of very quite detailed actions that we're going to take. What you will see within here, it isn't going to say, for example, we will specifically go and procure green energy. This is around what we're going to do to make it so that the organisation thinks about the climate emergency and the important factors in its day-to-day buying, be it going and buying a fridge or going and procuring a vehicle fleet from that point of view. So I've highlighted clearly one of the key things is when we do our business cases, we need to make sure climate emergency considerations are within every business case. I think that's really important. Lots of the issues here we're going to have to deal with is going to be about ensuring that our managers and staff are trained in the procurement process and understand the importance of what we're doing. So linking that in with climate awareness training, I think that's going to be very important. So we've certainly talked about having Will as the chief exec doing a video and on all the training that's played in advance, so that people know this is coming right from the top of the organisation. So I think there's quite a few things there. I engage all the time with Jane and the sustainability team to make sure that everything's been driven in the right direction. There's emphasis there on us establishing an environmental buying policy and looking at things like minimum standards. So very much I think that's for the lower value purchases. And also we put something very specific about things like single-use plastics. We need to drive those out where we can. That doesn't mean we can always do it as quickly as you would think from that point of view, but I think we're going to have a really good attempt. So again, work with our strategic suppliers to see what they can do, even with our current contract. Can we amend our current contracts? There might be lots of things we can do from that point of view. And clearly, we need to establish the climate emergency within our contract management framework. And there is a lot of work, I think as Jane said, within the work we're doing with the data teams, etc., we're establishing dashboards from that point of view, but it's going to take some time again on all these things. And as you saw from the new guidance we've got from government, we can now actually consider things like the suppliers' policies. We've not been able to do that so easily in the past. Now we can go and ask, make sure, are these the companies we really want to work with from that perspective? So there's some really interesting stuff from that side of view. Again, think local. I want to increase the limit for which we can, which we give the local suppliers the chance to bid for work. We were one of the first local authorities in the country to have a think local policy, and I think we have driven quite a lot of local spend as a result of that. And that's not just direct spend, it is through the supply chain too, it is. So, for example, there are lots of local sector organisations within the Virgin Care supply chain. So it's not always as visible as you think. So I would like to raise that limit to 75,000, 100,000. But I think we've got to have some consultation on that further, and we've got to look at the risks and the issues around that. But again, I think with what's coming through in the new white paper, I think that's going to make it easier. We definitely need to update our social value policy. Again, we were one of the first authorities in the country to have one. As a result, ours is probably looking a bit old compared with some of our neighbours now. But again, I think it's a good time to update it, as I think we can learn from some of the issues that we are now beginning to see with social value policies, in particular around the weighting. So, for example, Bristol City Council now put a 20% weighting on social value. However, that can be gained and there can be perverse results from that. So I think we need to be quite careful about that side of things and ensuring that the level of social value we include in a tender process is appropriate for the type of contract. And again, for context, some of the larger multinationals have big bid teams, and they have a lot of specialisms in terms of putting the bids together and being able to identify what they believe is social value. So again, we'll need to talk to you about what our social value priorities are. So we've got some ideas as to how we can do things from that perspective. Again, we want to focus on output-based specifications. Traditionally, we go input-based, and we want to encourage our providers to be innovative and come up with low-carbon solutions. They should know best. We're not the experts. And I think really important, we've really got to work on whole life cycle costing on our larger procurements. I don't think any authority has really got to the bottom of it. It's always seen as being too difficult. And I'm an accountant as well, and I find it difficult from that perspective. So again, rushing through things, giving people a bigger say. I just want to make sure there's more consultation on our pipeline so that people understand what's going on and that you can have your input and give your views on what should go into the specifications. Well, we already do that on lots of things anyway. If I'm going out on and doing a children's services procurement or commission, quite often we'll have children's panels, get the views from that point of view. But I think we do need to expand that side of it. And certainly where the issue is going to be a key decision, so it's a very large contract, we do need to get early input, but clearly, again, with my democratic services colleagues, we need to make sure we can manage that process. So again, we need to look at technology. I think there are both things that we can use to help specifically improve our footprint. But there are other things out there which we just don't even know about. I've been doing a lot of seminars recently, and you realise that the public sector really struggles to keep up with technology growth at the moment, and especially as individual authorities, we need to be working together if we're going to sort of like keep up with some of these areas. And certainly, for example, CIPFA, from the public finance point of view, are talking about undertaking service area impact assessments to see how technology can help us and to look at that in terms of the climate emergency as well. So that's something I really want to take up. Lots of the areas, I think, as a single local authority, I think we struggle to be able to deliver to, just because actually the cost of change can be quite significant. So if you're doing a traditional business case, things can be destroyed in terms of things like legal fees, project management, right from the start, if you're going on what I would call the bleeding edge out on your own from that point of view. So I'm having conversations with our neighbours. So I'm a member of Partners in Procurement, which is the West of England procurement collaborative, and that's across local authorities, the NHS and Blue Light and universities. And we're always talking about collaboration in different ways. So there's a lot going on from that point of view. Plus, as I mentioned, we're doing lots with Crown Commercial Services, because clearly they have a lot of clout because they're looking at things from a national perspective. And if I can get things on their pipeline, that will support us. That's what I'm going to do now, and use their weight. So again, just moving very quickly. So again, consultation. We really do want to put consultation at the heart of what we're doing. And we've got a few ideas as to how we can do that. Then focus on prevention. I think whenever we engage with suppliers, we need to be talking about the climate emergency. It is such an important topic. So I've said to everyone, whenever we do a supplier engagement event, we will have a section on it. And for example, before Christmas, we did do a energy supplier engagement event, and we went through everything we were looking at in terms of the climate emergency from that perspective, because clearly green energy is one of the key things we're looking to make sure we can procure for the future. So finally, be really interested in what should we call our procurement strategy. It's quite important actually, because clearly we had a think local procurement strategy, and it was very much about engaging with the local supplier base. So we've been talking about it as a climate emergency procurement strategy, but is that all this is about? Should it be a procurement strategy and just have sort of like think climate, think local, and different strap lines that we can use from that point of view to continue to get the procurement messages over? So that's just some food for thought, and really be interested in your views from that point of view. Because again, as you've seen from the government's procurement priorities now, they're not just focusing on the climate, they're focusing on diversity of suppliers and on jobs. And I think post-pandemic, we need to think about them in the whole, don't we? So, these are some sample outcomes we're looking to try and deliver. And again, I'm not going to go through these in detail, but they give you a good overview of the areas where we think procurement can help to improve both the Baines economy and help as a tool in terms of the climate emergency. So we've been running an internal consultation with officers because clearly we need to make sure that the strategy is deliverable. So we had 25 responses from the senior office, which to me was actually quite good. We've had all the key ones. Overall positive and in agreement. I was quite pleased that Will was positive about it, because I don't think I can move it forward if it wasn't. But these are some of the issues that came up as part of the consultation. One size doesn't fit all, and I think we accept that, and within lots of the text of the document, we're reflecting that all the time. Yes, we might need to implement as a tiered approach, so prioritising areas where we'll have the most impact. There are lots of questions being asked about cost, be sustainability, be local, and I think there needs to be quite a bit of training and education around this side, because there is still often a view that because it is sustainable and because it is local, it could be more expensive. And I don't think that's necessarily the case. It could be, but if you do a proper process, it shouldn't be, and if you benchmark properly. Training has definitely been highlighted as a big issue, and so has resources. And the more we start looking at this, it might mean we need to change our whole approach to procurement and purchasing, because we're very decentralised at the moment. Do we need to look at a more centralised model, in particular if we're looking to enforce standards from that point of view? But again, that would be a massive change in culture for the organisation. So that's it. Question?
Thank you, Richard. Can you give me an example of how you've influenced the marketplace?
How we, sorry, I didn't.
How you've influenced the marketplace?
So what we can do is, when we hold our supplier engagement events, we can talk with them about what they can and cannot supply. We can say what we would like to see them supply. So our best example of that was our food procurement, where we went out with our local food strategy. We said we wanted to source locally provided food. We had no marketplace to start with. We worked with a number of really good companies, and lo and behold, we delivered it, and it's now going national. So again, I think the other areas we can start doing it. If I look at what we've done in terms of some of our social care contracts, our residential care contracts and our home care contracts do have contractual clauses around the climate emergency, which we put in place to encourage them to do things in the best way they can. But again, it's quite difficult. When you're dealing with a pandemic, I think their priorities have probably been a little bit different at the moment, I'm afraid.
I'm sure there are lots of people. So, Grant.
Well, I'd like to thank the officer for that presentation. I thought that was very interesting, and for some of the information you provided Sarah with when I was asking questions about procurement not so long ago. I've got a couple of questions, and one of them is harks back to the conversations you were having with Sarah, and obviously we obviously want to see local farmers benefit from these sort of strategies and ways of thinking, and you've probably seen the NFU's Back British Farming campaign, which I would severely hope that this council would sort of get behind in a big way, and you know, especially as you said, dealing with Brexit and the fallout of that for British farmers. So any support that they could get from that is much needed. I just wondered what sort of communication and consultation has been happening with local farmers, you know, not necessarily just in Baines, or because we are a rural area, but there is, you know, farming in the southwest is a very big industry, so there's lots of potential there, I would have thought.
I've got a simple one to answer. The Southwest Food Hub have been engaged by Crown Commercial Services to do a lot of both supplier and buyer engagement. So I would really recommend you have a look at the Southwest Food Hub's website. They run regular events for both buyers and for producers. We are engaging with the Soil Association and with the NFU, which is reasonably easy because of the location. We've got very good relationships there. I think the issue again we've had in sort of like some of these areas, it has been, the pandemic has been getting in the way. Crown Commercial Services have been heavily delayed in delivering some of the good things they're going to do, but everything's beginning to get back on track, so I'm working closely with colleagues from that point of view. I think it is a really fantastic project which could change the way the public sector procures food long term. So I think that there's a good news story there, but it's not quite there because of the pandemic. I think it's going to become even more important though, because from a public health point of view, if we're trying to encourage healthy food habits and provide advice on eating, weight management, one of the best ways to do that is to encourage good food. So that's why I've spent an awful lot of time on this area. And certainly as soon as we can, I'd like to see it working in our care homes.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask another question. So I'm just wondering, it's a couple of more, I don't know, more technical things, but do we actually have any leverage to change contracts that are already in place? To, you know, with our suppliers to create the change that we want to see in terms of climate emergency, and also have we really considered and can we sort of map the financial implications that these changes in procurement will have on our overall council budget? Because obviously that's a really important thing to be looking at when we're talking about procurement.
I would hope it should have a zero impact. In terms of things financially, it is about again specifying correctly from that point of view. I think it's about not over specifying, and I think quite often if we look at some of the tender processes that are operated, we just go and buy what we bought last time and don't look at the changes. Especially if we don't give ourselves enough time to run those processes. In terms of contractual changes, yes, that can be more difficult if you work with a very specific specification, but in most cases it should not be material changes to the contract. And I think one of the exercises we really want to do is to write to all our supply chain and ask them what they can do and what assistance they need in doing it. So that will be one of the first things I think we do once we've agreed the strategy. So yes, it's always difficult to change a contract, but I think in the current world, many suppliers are already working at it anyway, so I think we've just got to ask.
Thank you. Joanna?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. I had the great delight of watching Noam Chomsky at Hay Festival this week. And one of the things he talked about was capitalism. And he said essentially that capitalism on its own will eat itself, but capitalism involved in the state will always exist. So procurement is very much part of that state capitalist system. And clearly what we're doing in procurement is facilitating that existence. So one of the things that you're doing is creating a space that's really important that we analyse and we pull apart and we evaluate in a wider way. And I'm very concerned about how the climate emergency is the lead on this. And going back to the discussion we had previously before with Jane Wildblood, the Sustainable Development Goals might be a more beneficial way to take this work forward. I mean, it's quite clear that there are competing values in everything you do. You've got enterprise and growth at one side, and then you've got social cohesion and benefit for groups of people at the other side. So I think by sitting with the climate emergency as the baseline for everything is actually a distraction, and I would wonder how we could take this forward in a more positive way, going back to Noam Chomsky.
I think that's a really interesting point, especially given the discussions we have. Clearly, at Cabinet last time, we published our first modern slavery policy. I think there are lots of broken marketplaces out there that we need to use our influence. I think things like real living wage is quite important, but then we get back to the point of, I'm afraid, affordability at times. So we need to make sure how we deliver things is effective and we can get the most. I think the problem with some of our largest areas of spend is it's very much about buying things like personal care, which are marketplaces which are far more difficult to influence from that point of view. But I feel we ought to try and do that. We need to encourage, for example, the upskilling of care workers, make it into more of a career from that point of view. There's lots of things I think we can do, but I really do take your point. And I think that's one of the reasons why I asked the question, what should we call this strategy? Again, we've had quite a discussion about the term sustainability. And in some areas, it's almost a dirty word now. So we were trying not to use the word sustainability, but at the same time, it isn't a sustainable procurement strategy. I think that should be at the heart of what we're trying to do. So if we look at some of the areas, for example, where you always have the interesting discussions over the climate emergency. Well, if you look at things like road building, and I know transport is one of your key areas, if you start looking at sustainability, there's loads of areas which we should be looking at, right from flood prevention, alternative transport strategies, before you even get to building a road. So it's trying to go on those journeys bits. So I think it's a really interesting area, and I do think it's something we can influence.
So going back to this piece of work, are you actually going to, I'm confused, are you going to produce a paper for us to take to the next level? At the moment, all I've had is the sort of presentation. What's going to happen next?
So what's going to happen here is I've done the officer consultation. This is a first element of consultation with members. I will be taking this again through our senior leadership team so that they get the feedback in terms of the views coming from officers, the views coming from yourselves. I'm then going to take it back next month to before working with Councillor Warren and the Cabinet to make sure we've got a policy statement that the Cabinet can endorse. We will then take that through the Cabinet process.
So that was actually one of my questions. Will you be taking this to all the other scrutinies? Because it does seem relevant to every part of the council.
Take it to the resources scrutiny.
You keep mentioning healthcare. So why isn't it also being taken to the children, adult and health and wellbeing policy?
If you think that's valuable, I will be very happy to do that. There is a separate project going on in terms of adult and children's commission. So I'm working on that with colleagues as well. So I will be making sure they all interrelate.
Well, one of my concerns about the council as an organisation is it's very siloed, so I think it would be important that you take that across the board. Thank you.
I would certainly say the procurement team, we're probably the least siloed people going. We work across the whole organisation, we have really good relationships, and we will do what we can to prevent that sort of thing.
We've got chairs and vice chairs of scrutinies next week, so I can bring that up to see if they can include that across the panels. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, just two things really on more practical basis. One in terms of food production, local food production, obviously it's beneficial from a freshness point of view, and also a lower carbon footprint of actually getting it. So some of our big food retailers have already started developing local connections, so I suggest that that's a dialogue that could be encouraged. And also, perhaps, going back to our planning committee, I understand not so long ago an application for an allotment out in the rural area was refused because it didn't look so pretty. Well, it might not look so pretty, but it could, A, provide employment, and B, provide local food. The other thing I would say very quickly, because I'm aware at the time, to me this is something that using our WECA colleagues, not WECA per se, but Bristol and South Gloucestershire, and also we've got Wiltshire, North Somerset and Somerset, as a block. A, we're a large buying group, we would be a large buying group, and also if there can be agreements, then there might not be the element perhaps of purchasing social care, for instance, or care in care homes, paying differential rates to care workers. So I could see a big benefit in actually working inclusively with our local authorities to get a better purchasing thing. Thank you.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on everything you say from that point of view. We do work as collaboratively as we can, but it's not always as easy as you would think.
Thank you. Dr. Kumar?
Thank you very much. And thank you, Richard. First of all, I've got a couple of questions, but before that, my colleague talked about great linguist Noam Chomsky, and I had pleasure of engaging with him 3 weeks ago through a webinar. I do not know what his policies would be on climate emergencies and how much he supports, but a couple of things I would like to say that he supports Mikhail's anarchist policies. And a person who says that Obama was running the biggest terrorist operation that the world had seen in 2013. So I do not know how much I will agree with that kind of person who is a libertarian socialist and supports terrorism. Coming back to you, sir, I had the pleasure of working with Councillor Bellotti as well, so when you talked about that, that was good. You also talked about that not only we have climate emergency, but we also have ecological emergency, and thanks to the current administration, because I remember in 2019 we here only approved that. The point about public money for public good, that is the very important point. I understand that you want to give people a bigger say through partnerships, through showcasing, but how would public really engage in procurement of the things? Can they? How will you do that, particularly during these pandemic times when we had not much opportunity to meet the people, either in a hall or even I didn't have the opportunity to meet my residents as frequently as I would have liked to. And my question was, other point is about you say that the council has a think local policy for 50 grand procurement. I think that policy is not very correct, to be honest, and I know that you are questioning on the figure part, I'm questioning the policy itself. The policy of our council should be not think local policy, but think global, act local. Think global and act local, because in this period of globalization, we are all related to each other. So obviously we need to give more impetus and support to the local enterprises or local companies, and particularly to the villages. I completely agree here with Councillor Grant. So how are we going to do that, and what are your thoughts on this one? Thank you.
We're getting on to some interesting areas. I think local is still important because the triple multiplier effect is really important in terms of getting money back into the economy. But I think you're right, I think we've got to think globally as well, and I think one of the areas we're thinking very much about at the moment, it's a relatively small procurement, it's a good example of it. We're looking at workwear at the moment, and clearly in terms of things like cotton from China, modern slavery, etc., it's really important we make the right decisions over who we buy from. So yes, lots of markets are global nowadays. Again, I think there's lots of publicity about the market for Australian beef at the moment, but clearly, again, with things like New Zealand lamb, traditional New Zealand lamb just comes in seasons when it's not available here. I must say, bringing that up all those miles, I can't see that as being the best way of doing things. So clearly things about seasonality I think is really important. I think one of the areas we haven't talked about here today is reuse and recycle. Why are we buying things in the first place if we can reuse them? So I think we've got to incorporate that in our procurement strategy from that perspective. I think the other important piece of news is you did hear in the last couple of days, there is now a shortage of processors for computers and for cars. I'm glad I bought my new car before this crisis, if I'm allowed to buy a car, but I do need it at the moment. But that could have a real impact on how we do things for the future. Again, we're getting into global issues with rare metals from that point of view. So, yeah, it's not simple, and all I can do is make sure we do our bit from that point of view. So, yes, I think it's a really important debate.
Thank you, Richard. John?
Sorry. Sorry, it's because it's the difficulty of that one. Otherwise, I can't see you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Richard. I think this is such an important piece of work, and so, yeah, really want to get it right. In terms of the name, I'm kind of struggling to get past Think Climate, but I'm sure that debate will rage. My first reflection was on the issue of the Think Local and the 50,000 limit, and my reflection is you were talking about 75 or 100, And I guess I'm not clear why we're not even more ambitious than that, so I'd be kind of interested to hear your reflection on pushing that as far as we think is sensible, and what are the risks of pushing it too far. In terms of then our ability to procure locally, and particularly I think you're talking about the health and social care market, is what are the opportunities for us to drive down journey times, drive down vehicle miles, and try and shift to cycles or walking, and having more kind of a local neighbourhood focus rather than district nurses or people travelling from here, there and everywhere. And then the third bit I was wanting to pick up on was really about waste and packaging, and what are the opportunities about really driving down both of those and kind of focusing our contracts around that. And then my final question was really, and I only stumbled across this relatively recently. I think we bought something from the new place that's popped up on Bear Flat, and it had a B Corp accreditation, which was about in some kind of environmentally sourced food. So what are the opportunities around accreditation in the system, and are there opportunities for us to use those environmentally or sustainably sourced accreditation as a driver for kind of that focus?
Right, so the first question around the limits, yeah. I think it all depends on what our risk appetite is. Lots of this has traditionally been dependent on the goods and services EU threshold, which is roughly around £173,000. It still remains the same. It just comes to how we balance value for money in terms of buying local. Is there a local marketplace to actually provide what we want? Again, defining what do we mean by local, because there are legal definitions from that point of view. I remember being in the banqueting hall when we were doing an event where we had a very detailed discussion on that one. Is it just within the Baines boundaries, or does it go into Bristol? Does it go down into the southwest? I think actually the answer is probably all of them from that perspective. So it all depends on where we can actually buy the goods. I was put in my place earlier over thinking that we don't have turkey farms in the local area, but was told there is one locally. So I've always thought you have to. Yeah, absolutely. I always thought we'd have to go to Norfolk to get the turkeys for the school meals from that point of view. So it's about us doing our research from that perspective. It really is. But again, I do think what the government is attempting to do with the new procurement regulations is to try and give us a little bit more flexibility in some of these areas. My only hope is they don't tie us up in bureaucracy at the same time. And if you see the responses from people like the Local Government Association and from the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, both of which I've been involved in, we have still got some concerns. So we are waiting to see what the white paper will do. Has that answered?
Yeah, my information will be to try and be ambitious.
Oh, that was what I was trying to.
All right. So journey times.
Oh yes, that one's more difficult because we are both an urban and a rural district. I think that's always proved to be difficult, and I know Bristol had real problems on trying to implement a similar arrangement. I think we're certainly reviewing the use of technology to actually reduce the need for home care packages, but it's a real difficult one. You're not going to stop a care package to someone because they're in a rural community. You're going to need someone to drive, especially if there isn't public transport from that point of view. Again, I think we're going to have to try and be ambitious. It all depends on the marketplace. I think we can try and do lots of things, and I want to try and do lots of things, but I think we've also got to learn by the mistakes and the examples from other organisations, and I don't think some of the learning lessons have always been that good on that side of things, just because the market is so fragile as it is anyway. Yes, I think we ought to do a lot more on that one, and I'm going to give that a lot of consideration, because again, that goes to conversations we can actually have even with our contracted suppliers. And I think I can probably give you another example where I think we've done quite a lot on that side. We don't actually spend a lot on stationery anymore, even less during the pandemic. It's that our previous supplier's USP was always next day delivery. We got rid of that, we did, by procuring in a different way, and we have spent a lot of time just making sure we're sourcing sustainable stationery where we can. But again, our actual spend now on stationery is minute. It certainly wouldn't be one of my strategic priorities anymore.
And I think, Grant, you just wanted to make a final point or a question?
Yeah, it was more based on what Councillor Wright had to say earlier, and it got me thinking about, do you think this procurement strategy can carry over the principles of like community wealth building, for example, which has been done in other authorities, basically, keeping the wealth in our local area and being able to develop from that?
I love the Cleveland model. I really like the idea of using anchor institutions and working together. I think we need to be innovative in how we do things. We need to look at opportunities. I'm interested in things like social impact bonds as well. I think there's a whole load of things that we can do in a more innovative manner if we've got the time to do them. And I think that can be absolutely crucial. It's the planning time. These things aren't delivered overnight. They take an awful lot of commitment from lots of organisations. But I personally think we've got some really good relationships with both the universities and the RUH. And actually going even further, I've got really good relationship with the Bristol universities as well. Why not? I'll stop there on that one because I think it's an interesting area which I know we're going to have lots of conversations on in the future.
Well, thank you, Richard, for your presentation. You mentioned you've consulted with 25 officers. This was a part of consulting now with council members. Do you feel that you've had enough to take away with you to add to that consultation?
So from officers, yes. I would welcome any feedback from members. Clearly, Sarah's given feedback, and we've had some feedback from some members who have had the privilege to early access. So really, if we share the presentation, and if you want to get back to me with any comments, further questions, I'd welcome it.
Lovely. Will the presentation go on the public website, Michaela?
Yes,
At the end of the presentation, I didn't show it. I've put some links to the key documentation, so to the procurement green paper and to the recent PPN, which is setting out the national procurement priorities.
No, I think that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Lisa. So item agenda, I'm just going to say it is 6:05, so if we can keep the next two items pretty tight, because I'm sure we all want to go home this evening. Lisa.
Chair, I just wonder, we have got another meeting on the 21st of June.
We have.
And you're right, there are big, two other big issues, that whether it would be appropriate, particularly because I noticed on the clean air zone, they are going to publish figures after 3 months. And after 3 months, that will be 15th of June. Whether it would be better to leave the clean air zone analysis until the 21st, so that we can look at the data, because they are publishing the CO2 emission count. And then so we've just got Livable and Neighbourhood, because they're two very, very big things.
Can I just bring Catherine in, just to see what Catherine would like to say on that? Would you like to come in? So Lisa's suggesting that we put back this item to the 21st of June because you are releasing data of the clean air zone after the 15th of June.
So we are doing
I mean, I'm happy to defer it if you want to. We can report on those with a bit more clarity. I don't know if that's helpful. I know.
Can I just say that no one at home can probably hear us because no one's using their microphones?
Got this one on.
in June, we have looked at updates, we have the investment in neighbourhood services, we have the charging point update, and the update on Western Gateway. Our next meeting after that is going to be July. July the 27th. So far, on that meeting, we've had 4
We are due to go to Cabinet with an update on the 30th of July. So it will be just before the Cabinet meeting.
Or at the next agenda briefing, you could talk about moving some of those from July.
Chair, could I suggest exactly that from the 21st of June, you've got the charging points update and the update on the Western Gateway. Could they not be, two of those, be put back until July so that we can take...
All right.
See you in June. 21st
So
June.
June the 21st.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
You can go home now after.
So the panel has agreed to move the charging points from June, the 21st meeting, and the update on the Western Gateway meeting to the 27th of July. The clean air zone will then be brought back to us on the 21st of June. And I'd like to thank Catherine for her time in coming this evening. Sorry it's been a bit of a wasted time as well, but thank you. So our last item on the agenda is a Livable Neighbourhood update, and if we can ask Nick Helps to join us, please. When Nick has joined us, we'll ask Sarah Warren to move the motion, or move the report, I should say, sorry. Nick, are you in the banqueting room? you, Nick, for coming on this afternoon, and I'm going to ask Councillor Sarah Warren to open the presentation, or the report, I should say, sorry.
Okay, shall I start?
I think Sarah's going to introduce it.
Yep. So the Livable Neighbourhood strategy was developed last year by my predecessor at Transport, and since the new year, ward councillors have submitted schemes now being shortlisted. The announcement of the first wave for further development will be made at this month's Cabinet meeting. Livable neighbourhoods, as you all know, are schemes that are about making residential areas into spaces that are healthier, more vibrant, nicer to spend time in, so as to encourage more walking and cycling and to discourage travel by car for those who are able to use an alternative. So it's a really important plank, not only in our work to address the climate emergency, but also a vital public health innovation, as well as a measure to make for happier and pleasanter communities. And with that, I'll hand over to Nick.
Great, thank you, Councillor Warren. So I've got a presentation today which gives some background to the Livable Neighbourhoods strategy and an update since the Cabinet report in December. First of all, I wanted to show a graph of what's happened to road traffic since 1949. This is Department of Transport figures. And back in 1949, cycling was actually higher by about 3 billion cycle kilometres per year. Of course, since then, we've had quite a substantial, sustained increase in road transport. And no one ever asked if this increase in car traffic was acceptable. Secondly, some data on vehicles. So cars are getting longer, wider, taller and heavier, and partly around changes to vehicle design to do with safety elements for the vehicle occupant, not so much for pedestrians on the highway. And just pointing this out, that this is having an impact on the way that vehicles are affecting the ability of people to walk and cycle. Just wanted to highlight a note about school travel. I was out doing a site visit the other day and saw this vehicle parked on the pavement, which really shows a disregard to the needs of people walking and cycling, and a disregard to people going to the school there. And interesting, the cartoon about we drive our child to school because there's too much traffic. So getting on to some previous schemes in Bath. The sorts of measures for livable neighbourhoods aren't new in Bath. And there have been a number of schemes which I've shown on this slide, plus one other scheme where the Royal Crescent was closed in the 1990s as well. And all these schemes, as I recall, faced difficulty implementing them, but would anyone really want to reverse those schemes now? I don't think they would. The current slide sets out our livable neighbourhood strategy and the three components, of course, all coming down from the climate and ecological emergency, and including the corporate strategy. And we have the three components: low traffic neighbourhoods, residence parking, and electric vehicle charging. So sorry, some of the text is a bit small in this chart, but this is just to give you a timeline of what's happened since the last time this panel met to review livable neighbourhoods back in June last year. So the next step is Cabinet will be meeting later this month to to discuss the proposals which I'll go on to mention. I just want to show a couple of slides about the consultation work that we undertook last year and the level of support for schemes. So this is got a couple of, or 3 questions here, and massive support. The text, the number in green is the agree and strongly disagree. So the light green and dark green elements combined. And the
How much, in terms of consultation, how many people responded?
there were,
1,900.
yes, okay, thank you very much. So showing huge support for the Livable neighbourhood, some of the questions that were asked about reclaiming road space, encouraging active travel, and reducing the dominance of vehicles. And a second slide showing equal support for potentially restricting through traffic and acknowledging there would be trade-offs to achieve that. Now we can compare these results to a national survey which the Department of Transport commissioned, and there they showed similar high levels of support for reallocating road space, and this was across towns and cities in the UK, including places much smaller than Bath. So but it's good to see that the national picture shows a similar level of support for these measures. So there were concerns expressed. These icons clockwise from the top left. There was concern that proposals could negatively impact disabled people and older people. People were worried about the effect of topography and how this could limit walking and cycling in Bath. People were concerned about families with young children and how the proposals would affect their daily travel needs. They were concerned about the cost of residence parking permits on low-income households. They were concerned about dedicated parking for electric vehicles, reducing the availability of general parking. And finally, the central figure represents people's concerns about decanting traffic onto major roads, potential increases in congestion, and overall parking availability. So it's understandable that people have these concerns, and we'll seek to mitigate any adverse effects, working with communities. A lot of people were also very positive and identified opportunities. And the majority of respondents embraced the opportunities that livable neighbourhoods could deliver. Clockwise from the top left, this included the potential for co-design, the latent potential for change, opportunities for cycling, travel to school, public transport, electrification of the vehicle fleet, and the huge benefits of walking. So the Council's corporate strategy makes an overarching commitment to give people a bigger say in shaping the Council's services. We've therefore developed a detailed roadmap of how schemes will be developed, assessed and evaluated. We'll respond positively to community requests made with the support from ward members. We'll actively engage with the community using the principles of co-design. So following request asking members to submit applications, we had 48 applications from across the district, from Bath and from the rest of the district. And the metrics for the different types of schemes listed on the slide. We felt that low traffic neighbourhoods and schemes around schools deserve particular prominence. So for Bath, this slide shows the extent of proposals, particularly low traffic neighbourhood and safe routes to schools, not necessarily all the requests for residence parking. And you can see that we've tried to link the areas because we feel that the schemes will have could have wide area effects. So by linking schemes at an early stage, we can identify synergies and ensure that schemes will be more successful. And for the rest of the district, there were proposals in Whitchurch, Quinchart and Pensford, and Temple Cloud. So looking at how to prioritise, obviously a huge appetite for livable neighbourhood schemes. So we developed an assessment criteria based on the number of households, how many people would benefit, alignment with LTN objectives agreed at Cabinet last December, and severity of issues, the potential time frame and complexity of schemes, potential schemes, and alignment with wider strategy. We took the elements of near schools, near local centres, recreation facilities, within or close to the CAS or AQMA, areas of multiple deprivation and childhood obesity. And this provided a scoring matrix which we'll be presenting to Cabinet later this month, at which Cabinet will be deciding which areas to proceed with. They're not schemes yet, they are still areas. We'll be issuing a consultation engagement plan, starting consultation, co-design, looking at preliminary design costings, consulting again, preparing details for implementation using experimental traffic regulation orders. These are orders which are can be enacted quite quickly, and also have to be confirmed, so following review of data collection of the monitoring. So the monitoring review schemes, and then the schemes will be confirmed, or where we have experimental traffic orders, the schemes will be either confirmed or removed. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Can you just go back to the slide LTN and SRT? Can you explain with the coloured rings what they mean, because this is not on your presentation?
Oh, sorry. The colours were just to represent different areas. They weren't to define. It was just where areas were adjacent, coloured them the same colour, and then linked them to show that they would be, or we feel they would be, benefit in combining schemes in those areas, or at least consulting on those areas together.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Lisa.
Yes, thank you for that presentation. I'm interested in the qualities assessment. The report says a series of quality and impact assessments to be undertaken at each of the three strategies. Impact for disabled people and communities living in socially and poor localities. One of the reported...
Lisa, could you put your microphone on, please?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'll start again. Sorry. Yes, under your report where you say, Nick, a series of equality impact assessments have been undertaken for each of the three strategies, potential impacts for disabled people and communities living in socially and or poor localities. Some of the response that has been publicised, particularly from the London boroughs, has suggested also that low traffic neighbourhood schemes, and I'm thinking specifically that rather than the safe route to school, etc., that they have hindered emergency vehicles, they have made health workers who have to go to individual homes, it's increased their time. And you then go on to say, with proposed measures to eliminate or mitigate this impact. And I think somewhere in the report it says that that mitigation will be done during the time when you're designing the new scheme. And I'm at a loss to understand how you can eliminate these impacts on those groups of people who do need a car, and certainly in the areas of multiple deprivation where there are likely to be a higher proportion of older cars, and because they're older cars they won't be CO2 emission compliant, and that is going to impact on the charges that they will be charged in the new residence parking schemes. So you're going to put more residence parking schemes into these low traffic neighbourhoods, and yet you're saying that some of the areas are the financially deprived areas anyway. So how has all that been sorted out? Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and cover all those points. I think the point about the ambulances, particularly in London, I think quite a lot of the press has been around, let's say, members of the public bringing those concerns forward and being reported, as I understand it, as an issue. And it's been the same has happened for taxis as well. But certainly I know the fire brigade has been more positive in London, has been more positive. They have a more integrated dispatching system, which allows them to know exactly where livable neighbourhoods are or road closures. And really, if you think about what is actually delaying emergency vehicles in getting to their destination, and it's road traffic. There has been a problem about some of the data coding, I think, was reported recently, that ambulance drivers had put reason for delay or traffic calming, and I think that was reported in the sort of transport technical press, as I think they felt that was an over-reporting. So mitigation for that, well, we hope later this year we'll be given powers under the Traffic Management Act 2004, Part 6, which will allow us to use automatic number plate recognition cameras instead of road closures, instead of bollards, which would mean we could permit vehicles through, similar to a bus gate. So emergency vehicles, refuse collection vehicles, education, and disabled transport could all be permitted. But and any other class of vehicle, but ideally those ones would be the ones that I would suggest. So we do have we should have, the government's indicated we will have those, we should be given those powers, so we should be able to use them next year to enforce these restrictions without having bollards. So that gives us a good tool. You mentioned about older cars and CO2. We're aware that more affluent communities have come forward with proposals, or proposals come forward in more affluent areas. So we are assisting some areas in bringing forward proposals in more deprived areas. So we're working at least with one area. And when it comes to the older cars, that's the point about the on-street residential parking. I think we have to accept that, accept that some people are buying cars that are £1,000, and but if we don't take action, I think we won't see improvements in air quality and reductions in carbon emissions. So I think implementing some of the measures could be possibly could be more phased, but we can't. I think you have to take measures. You have to take steps to reduce the level of older vehicles on the highway network. And in fact, deprived communities will, and probably disabled people as well, have probably got most to gain from livable neighbourhoods, because the poorest people don't own cars. A lot of people, elderly, children, can't use cars, and disabled people using wheelchairs, for instance, will benefit from all the livable neighbourhood proposals by making the street a better place to be in.
So you're prepared to sacrifice the financial well-being of the lower socio-economic groupings who can't afford expensive cars but need their vehicle to get to their workplace, perhaps out of Bath or the other side of Bath at a time when the buses aren't running. And the other thing, if I may, Chair, I was going to ask was, how do you counter the contention that these livable neighbourhoods, and I noticed that there are a number north of the London Road, and those poor people living on the London Road are going to get more traffic because they've been pushed out of the areas north there. So, I mean, what about their mitigation?
Nick, I think Sarah wanted to come in.
Shall I quickly answer that? Or?
Yeah.
Can I quickly come back to the point about London Road? Livable neighbourhoods are not, and low traffic neighbourhoods are not about decanting traffic from one street to another. That wouldn't be success. Success would be we want to take out through traffic from residential areas and reduce the total number of vehicles, because there wouldn't be the capacity just to move traffic from one street to another. So success will be an overall reduction in vehicle kilometres and an increase in walking and cycling.
Sarah.
I was just going to respond to the comment about sacrificing the lower socio-economic groups in relation to residents' parking zones. So as far as the Livable Neighbourhood policy that we're discussing right now is concerned, residents' parking zones will only come forward in those areas who are requesting it, are co-designing, working on those areas with us. So there's a separate consultation going on about the structure of the residents' parking zone payments, and that's a consultation, and we will listen, and if people feedback that that's a concern, then that as Nick says, there could be options that can be tweaked or changed in that policy in response to that.
Okay, so Shelley.
Thank you, Chair. Hi, Nick. Thank you for your presentation. My question is, I'm just looking, I'm one of the councillors for Western, just thinking if a scheme is not successful in the consultation, could other traffic calming measures be used instead in other parts of the ward?
Yes, of course. In terms of success, if you meant it was implemented and then didn't meet the sort of success criteria, I think we would be happy to carry on with other different types of measures. Yes, if one type of measure fails, then we would try something else. Subject to community wishing us to go forward with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Kumar?
Thank you very much. This is a scheme which the whole board and North East Somerset is looking at. Livable neighbourhood, and particularly in my ward. Now I can see that on the presentation, although I'm seeing over here, 2 applications from my ward, I'm sorry to be a bit specific, were submitted in February. Now my question would be, will you allow more application from the ward or not in future? Because we were promised that we will be given another opportunity. Number 1 question was that. Number 2, that I can see that 28 application or LTNs were submitted. How will you prioritize? Now suppose from my ward 2 application has gone into, on what criteria you will prioritize exactly? Will the councillors and the public, because you say that everybody and every officer is making presentation and saying, this will give people a bigger say on our services and schemes and plans. Saying is different, doing is different. So my residents are concerned. How are we going to give them a bigger say? And my third point is the next steps. I can see that second round of public consultation will be in November 2021, and detailed design for implementation will depend on outcome of consultation, which is fine. But if everybody agrees, when will this materialize? Particularly, I'm really concerned about St. John's Road, not very far from here. And we have tried to change signages and everything, but finally the residents on the streets have been assured that perhaps livable neighbourhood scheme will be the right answer to some extent. to mitigate the problem on that street, which is a very, very important street. It's the nucleus of Bath, heart of Bath. So thank you.
Yes, the next application deadline is the 5th of August, so we will be accepting further applications by the 5th of August. You asked about prioritising. So I set out some of the ways that we were looking to prioritise. Originally, we had considered a huge number of, a wide range of metrics to measure to see why a scheme should go for another. But because of the number of applications, we brought it down to only a few criteria. And they are those ones I mentioned, sort of households and the alignment with objectives and severity of issues. Severity of issues could be, for instance, the level of through traffic, also alignment with the wider strategy. So, all of the schemes submitted, particularly Livable Neighbourhood ones and residence parking, were all very valid. So, I think the intention would be that it would be a programme that would continue into the future, and all schemes hopefully would get implemented. And you mentioned about St John's Road. I mean, that does form quite a bigger area with Great Polney Street and the area around Henrietta Gardens, and even sort of going to Edward Street. So it's quite a reasonable, quite a large population. And I think that's actually, it's always been considered possibly as one of the top priority schemes because of the level of through traffic which goes through there on a regular basis, particularly, it's northbound. So I'm confident that we would be able to devise a scheme there that would be acceptable to not all the residents, but I think the vast majority.
Thank you. John.
Thank you, Nick. I think this is really quite an exciting and ambitious programme, and not without risks. And I'm really glad to see the strong positive messages from the engagement and the kind of the strong feedback, really, and the fact that so many schemes have been put forward, and in particular that the engagement with the community is very much at the heart of that co-design, which I think is critical to kind of the success. I wanted to kind of ask a question particularly around monitoring and evaluation, and how will that work, and how quickly will we be able to pick up if there are unintended consequences. So using a parochial example, I'm quite interested in kind of thinking about closing off Old Foss Road, cutting through Odddown, because there's a lot of traffic that is using it, cutting through a neighbourhood. But my worry about pushing forward on proposing that scheme is that the unintended consequences, that the Wells Way and Froome Road are already at peak times chock-a-block with traffic, and so the unintended consequence of making that neighbourhood better will be that actually will create more air pollution, more fumes on the main road. So how quickly can we be able to tune in on the evaluation of those details and be able to kind of adjust if we need to, or reverse if it's actually a disaster? And then my third question is really about scheduling. So it seems like we've got quite a lot to deliver already with the proposals that you've got, and then we're going to have another wave in the 5th of August. So how confident are we around the scheduling of being able to deliver these schemes? And it is the reality that if I put forward a scheme for part of my ward in August, that it's going to be several years down the line before we're even thinking about sort of the community engagement piece around it.
So with monitoring and evaluation, we would undertake traffic monitoring sort of before and during a scheme. So for instance, we could have some temporary loops down to count traffic for a few weeks before a scheme, and then during. If a scheme was an absolute disaster, I mean, I suppose you could on day one cancel a scheme, but I think it's best to wait. It's best to agree what sort of time we should wait, because these things will settle down. I think ironically, if you predict chaos, it doesn't materialise because travel behaviour changes to adapt. So there's a interesting sort of human behaviour element there. You obviously don't want to predict chaos, but I'm just suggesting what people might think it would be a disaster. I think the benefits are just huge, and I know the road you're speaking about, and the fact that that's used as a rat run by traffic, that it's moving off of the main road onto that road you mentioned, Old Foss Road. If that's longer distance traffic, it shouldn't be on that road. So I think it's right that it should be directed to the main routes, and we should be forcing down, as I mentioned earlier, the total level of vehicles, not getting through traffic down, but also reducing residents' dependency on cars for trips as well by improving the options for walking, cycling, public transport. But don't shame people into behaviour change. I'm saying we create opportunities, and then people actually want to cycle. We've just got to give them facilities to do so. Scheduling, yes, it's an ambitious programme. It will depend very much on the individual areas, how quickly schemes could be developed. And of course, I would still want you to put forward applications in August. Some applications that were put forward in May will be considered by Cabinet later this month. So, and I think we should be ambitious, and we should start to be talking about these schemes, even if they may take a few years to come to fruition.
Joanna.
Hi. Thanks, Nick, for your excellent presentation, and great to see some of my photographs in it. Councillor Warren, in November, when the policy was signed off, did you write a statement for that as your role as a climate emergency person?
I believe the policy was signed off in December.
It was November 20th.
All right, I don't know. I don't remember being asked to do so.
Well, I'm just wondering, because it's so important to the climate emergency, whether you actually wrote a statement to support this policy.
I don't believe I was asked to do so, and I would very willingly have done so had I been asked to do so. There were two transport cabinet members at the time, so I would very willingly have done so.
Okay, and as there are now two cabinet members for transport, I am wondering where the other one is today?
Well, this is... we're not allowed any more in the chamber.
Okay, that's very useful to hear.
I happen to know that watching
great to hear. So is the new cabinet member going to be responsible for ETROs, or is it you going to be responsible for ETROs?
In terms of their
sign-off. So somebody within cabinet has to sign off the TRO process. So will that be your cabinet role, or will that be the other transport cabinet role?
I'm not sure. It might be hers. I don't think it...
Well, this is quite a serious matter, because how we take forward this process will result in using the TRO process.
Absolutely.
And it's quite clear that in your role and in the new role of the other transport officer, you're not yet aware of who is signing off which of those TRO processes.
No, but as this will be a cabinet decision, I don't think there will be an issue in a cabinet member refusing to implement a cabinet decision.
Sure, but it's still important to understand who is signing off the TRO process.
Absolutely, and when we leave the meeting, I will very happily ask an officer and, find out or check.
Please
exactly
could we have within 5 days? Thank you.
Yes.
So going on, there's quite a lot here, actually. So LTNs, as we've heard from Councillor here, Lisa, thank you. Yeah, we do have to really think about how they are put in and how they're used. But one of the things that we do know is that the wider benefits for public health are enormous. So I'm just wondering, in that sphere, how has public health been included in this process? And equally, will Councillor Alison Bourne, who sits now in terms of health, be brought into this piece of work in terms of the Children, Adult and Health and Wellbeing Policy Board? Because that's quite an important element of this piece of work. How we see public health and how, the obesity crisis, how people get around, mental health, etc. So where is this in terms of the silo of the council?
Is this for Nick or for Sarah? Sarah.
I mean, I don't know the whole history of what has happened to date, so Nick would be a better person to answer that question. In terms of the history going forward, I'm delighted for Councillor Bourne to be involved in whatever capacity she wishes, and if I don't know whether you're asking whether this paper should go to the health and children's PDS panel, but if
Yes, I am asking for that.
That would seem a perfectly reasonable course of action.
I would think it was an important part of having that advocacy campaign. Okay, so one of the things that keeps being discussed is walking and cycling. So one of the first questions I have you been to Waltham Forest?
No, I haven't had the opportunity to visit Waltham Forest. We've been in a pandemic for the last year, but I believe there's a meeting in my diary over Zoom with the councillors from Waltham Forest that's forthcoming.
Brilliant. And can I ask Nick Helps, have you been to Waltham Forest?
Councillor Wright, I'm not Waltham Forest, but I have been to a lot of areas where these sorts of schemes have been, types of schemes have been implemented. For instance, in Brighton there are some schemes which I've been to and seen those.
Okay, so one of the things I think that I've certainly learned from speaking to Clyde Lokes, who led this at Waltham Forest, is that one of the things that you should never do is discuss walking and cycling, that actually this is about providing communities with a healthier and more vibrant community. So what is the comms plan for taking this work forward, and how much of the budget of 2.2 million will be used towards that comms plan?
So yes, the comms plan was on the next steps to be completed. We haven't set aside a cost element for that. It will be substantial.
How substantial? Because I certainly know that Clyde Lokes suggested that at least it's a third of the budget.
I didn't want to commit to. Yes, I understand he said comments like that. I didn't want to commit to saying it will be that proportion, but it will be substantial. It will be into the hundreds of thousands.
Okay, thank you. And then thinking about the wider strategic network, it's really interesting hearing different councillors this evening talk about their own area and their individual problems. And I think that's really where I am concerned most, is that there's a political element to this, rather than recognising there's a strategic vision across the piece. And how are you going to deal, particularly with ward councillors who have their own internal wish campaign, as opposed to recognising the wider vision that's needed for transport across the region?
So, if I call that you're asking how to deal with individual ward councillors. Can you just clarify? Individual ward councillors who may not be totally aligned with the objectives of Livable neighbourhoods. Is that?
Well, it's not that they're not totally aligned, but you can see that there's a friction between I've got a resident really complaining to me about this street and this problem, as opposed to, okay, there is that small problem, but how does it sit into the overall issue across the city? So I was very aware that one of the things that we were expected of ward councillors is that they were meant to be submitting through their performers the problems that they had, not the solutions that they wanted. So I'm concerned that what an awful lot of ward councillors have so far done is supply their solutions rather than the problems, so that experts like yourself can take that forward, because there's a real mismatch between the information that councillors have and the legality of the highways and important documents such as LTN 120, Bus Back Better, the LC Whip and gear change. And I'm pretty confident that most people in this room won't have read all of those 4 documents or understand the detail and the necessary legality required for that.
Okay, so yes, we did ask ward members to put forward their suggestion. Well, we asked them to put forward particularly problems and issues, and yes, many did include solutions. That those solutions might not be necessarily the ones that get taken forward, but I mean, some of those were recommended by some residents' associations as well. So I don't think there was harm in putting the solutions in, but I don't think those ward members should necessarily think that those are solutions that will be implemented, because we'll take a step back and look at the problems and issues to devise the most suitable solutions, particularly ones which don't create undesirable effects on adjacent wards, for instance, adjacent areas, for instance.
So one of the points you've raised already so far is about the severity of through traffic, and that will be one of your ways of measuring things. So where will you get that data? How will you create that data? Where will that data come from?
So for through traffic, we'd be looking at number plate recognition surveys to determine how much through traffic there is on the street, taking points that where it leaves the main road network and then rejoins the main road network.
So I certainly know within my own ward that I certainly undertook a study several years ago through the University of Bath on that. So I don't know of anybody else who's done similar work anywhere else in Bath. So how are you actually going to bring those bits of data together to actually get a better understanding of what's taking place?
I mean, we would invite information that anyone's prepared previously to the table. We also do have quite a lot of data already collected through the clean air zone and a lot of traffic counts. We'll be doing more traffic counts and collecting a sufficient amount of data to enable us to evaluate the scheme. So we'd be looking at what do we need to evaluate this scheme, how can we determine if it's been a success, and that would guide our monitoring programme.
Okay, and also then on this whole community advocates, you've mentioned residents, what are they called? Residents groups. FOBRA, there's quite a lot of residents groups, and again, I'm challenged by that, because I certainly know, for instance, again, going back to my ward, we have no residents associations. So again, how are you going to work with that disparity? Because there seems to be, you know, for instance, there's certain parts of Lansdowne that have 13 residents associations, whereas the whole of the ward of Lambridge have none. So how are you going to make that fairness in advocacy? Because there would clearly be lots of people in wards which don't have residents association who would be very good at advocating for them. So where are you going to find these community voices?
Okay, so I don't see that as a competition, because in any particular area we'd be dealing with the community as we find it, but we would be searching out for community groups that exist and representatives that exist, and then inviting the general public. In areas where there are a high density of residents associations, that's just a quicker conduit into those areas, but we'd still be seeking people's input and input from community groups and businesses from whichever area we're working in.
And going back to that whole residents association issue.
Karen, we went back to your last question, Joanna.
Sure.
Thank you.
The issue will be that some of those will be very competing against each other and create a political quagmire for all concerned, both officers and councillors. So how will that be dealt with?
That's one of the reasons we're proposing to join some of the areas to ensure that one area isn't, the suggestions from one area doesn't cause problems for the adjacent areas. Particularly, for instance, you may have seen that we're proposing to join the circus area, Lower Lansdowne, Marble Buildings, and creating quite a large cell, so that schemes can be devised that help the whole area rather than just helping one individual area of one residents' association.
Thank you. Grant.
Thank you for your short, brief presentation. I think the Councillor Wright was mentioning about Waltham Forest and what Clive's done there, and I'm not 100% sure how that completely translates, if I'm honest, to this area. Bath is a very different location. It's historical. It's got road layouts that aren't necessarily always fit for purpose, and we have to try and come up with schemes that will work for what is a geographically is difficult, and trying to learn where to put these schemes in place is going to be a large challenge. And I think one of the big concerns that I've got is that because this is a policy and strategy that ultimately will affect Bath a lot more than areas of North East Somerset in its implementation, what is going to be happening in North East Somerset to level that playing field so that it's not a lot of money going into improving infrastructure in Bath, but because we obviously need improvements to infrastructure out where I live, important, like connections to cycle networks and stuff like that, which might not necessarily fit exactly and precisely in with low traffic neighbourhoods, but needs to be addressed. I also think there is this worry for residents across the area that if the scheme doesn't work, then we have paid a lot of money, residents' money, going towards these schemes, and then they get cancelled, they get removed. We had in Porton, the parish council implemented when it implemented the 20-mile-an-hour zone in Porton, put bollards, pull-outs up the roads, and they ended up all getting removed. And what that did is created untold anger and frustration with local residents because they just saw it as a waste of their hard-earned money. And I'm really, really worried that and concerned that we need to really concentrate on the areas and the people and residents that these schemes are going to affect. And I'm not sure really that the 1,900 people that's been surveyed is a very accurate way of doing that, to be blunt. So I just think more work needs to be done, and I just don't want taxpayers' money wasted, basically.
I just want to follow on from Grant, actually, because I thought there will be a knock-on effect to the residents in North East Somerset, especially Peasdown, Radstock and Somernorton. People won't come to Bath because of the livable neighbourhoods and negotiating them. We, in Radstock and Somernorton, Keynsham got a great town centre, but we don't have those resources, we don't have those facilities to give our residents. So I feel that, we're forgetting about the other 80,000 that live in North East Somerset.
Can I make a comment? I would really encourage North East Somerset councillors to put in applications, and as you've heard today, these schemes are not just about road closures. They're about, they can be about a range of safety improvements, also about residents parking if incoming parking is a problem in your area, and they can also be about EV charging. So I would really encourage North East Somerset councillors to think about putting in some more applications ahead of the 5th of August deadline. And I mean, the other thing to say is where they are road closure schemes, I think they're relatively inexpensive to put in and to try out. Anyway, I'll hand on to Nick in case there's more you want to add.
Yes, John, just only a couple of things. Yes, as far as costs go, I think for experimental traffic orders, you would try to minimise the costs, and you wouldn't do the final scheme, so it wouldn't be the full public realm scheme that you might replace it with. So we'd be looking at doing it as cost effective as possible. And I understand that, yes, spending money and then taking things out causes frustration. I think areas been reported in the press recently where there have been schemes taken out. Possibly there wasn't sufficient public engagement in those areas. Quite a few were done as experimental schemes, without full consultation. In terms of the responses to the consultation, most of the people that responded on Livable Neighbourhoods last year, most of them were from Bath. In terms of sample size, though, the government's survey, Department of Transport survey, only had a reasonably similar a reasonably similar sample size, because when it comes to sampling, it's down to whether or not you're getting a good sample is dependent on the variation in the answer, not the size of the population. So, considering the overwhelming support we got for all the proposals for livable neighbourhoods, I think it is statistically significant, but particularly for Bath residents, because they were the ones the majority that responded to the consultation.
Bath and North East Somerset.
180,000.
Firstly, the consultation in Livable neighbourhoods didn't collect postcode data. It collected information on where people lived. So they said if they lived in Bath or lived in the rest of North East Somerset. I think when we go to an area and undertake consultation with that community, that's at the point we're going away from the 1900 that responded to this consultation. We're actually asking them what are the problems in their area, and then suggesting solutions. So we're not relying on the consultation, the wider consultation, when we're designing a specific scheme. And there would be at least a couple of rounds of consultation. One, engagement about problems and issues and potential schemes, but then the second round of consultation would be particularly about these are some designs we've come up with, how do you feel about those, and commenting on those. So I think there would be adequate time for all concerned to be involved in the process if they wish.
Thank you. So in order of names I've got Paul.
So as part of any livable neighbourhood, we'd be monitoring traffic in the area and on the adjacent roads to see if there is displacement and the level of that. So we'd be reporting that and being quite transparent about that. I think car ownership could stay as it is, and people could be using their cars less. People are using their cars for very short trips, and that it just isn't sustainable. And if people are then using their cars less, they won't need to own so many. And I think the CAS, there's a separate monitoring being undertaken for the CAS.
Dr. Kumar?
Thank you very much. Yes, just 1 or 2 points. I want to make it very, very sure that we were talking about a low traffic neighborhood or livable neighborhood consultation, which ended in November 2020. And we're not talking about the active travel scheme consultations, which was held recently. So, are you also involved in these consultations? Because quite a lot of people are confused with the low traffic or livable neighborhood scheme and active travel schemes. Yeah? So there's quite a lot of support for low neighborhood schemes, but not for some of the active travel schemes. And if you are involved, would you and your cabinet member of that time regret that without consulting the councillors, local councillors, and local resident associations wasted so much of time on some particular active travel scheme, which was completely rejected by 9 RWAs in Bathwick. There may not be RWAs in every ward, but there, as you say, one sun is more powerful than many stars. I know that in some ward, may not be RWAs, but there are different forms of resident association. For example, Transition Lark Hall. They give quite a lot of information to the residents and very regular updates. Thank you.
Okay. So I was just talking about the Livable Neighbourhood consultation and not the active travel schemes. The Livable Neighbourhoods is about the policy and the types of schemes. And of course, the active travel schemes came down to preliminary designs for those schemes which were consulted on. And as you said, some were less popular than others. I don't think you asked me do I regret. Well, I joined the council in November 2020, so I can't comment on before that. And I think we can all learn from these consultations and the way forward, particularly with cycling schemes. It can be difficult sometimes. I mean, any scheme where you're proposing to remove parking can be difficult. Thank you.
So lastly, Grant.
So I just wanted to come back on something you mentioned in one of your previous replies to me, and it's basically I just thought, you know, we've had the applications, but are the council going to be showing their sort of leadership in deciding the broad approach, you know, and or are you just going to do it solely off the back of applications? You know, are you going to be implementing schemes in other locations because you think strategically it would work better than what people have necessarily put forward to you? Does that make sense?
If you want to.
I mean, it's an interesting point. I think a scheme, it would be difficult to envisage taking forward a scheme without the ward member, at least one of the ward members if there's 2 ward members, but preferably both ward members fully behind a scheme. I don't think for livable neighbourhoods. I mean, that might not be the case with other schemes where there is a strategic importance. I think, for example, where we have the work being undertaken by WECA and the Metrobus proposals, the studies that are ongoing at the moment, I think when we come to a point of if we need to be putting in some bus lanes, for instance, you may get a position there where you get the local ward member objecting. But I think in that case, let's take the Bristol-Bath corridor or the Norton Radstock to Bath corridor or the Norton Radstock to Bristol. Those corridors, they have been identified by WECA as being strategically important. And I think in that case, I think you could envisage taking forward proposals without the ward member support.
Right, so that brings us, and we're asked to note the report, 3.1 to 3.7. So is everybody happy with the note and the presentation? Oh, Nick has given us, yes, that looks like everybody. Thank you, Nick. So the panel work plan, that's going to change slightly now because we're moving the clean air agenda to the 21st of June. So we will update all members on the work plan going forward. And thank you for this evening. So that brings us to a close at 7:15. Thank you.
Thank you.